You know how Christmas stories always start with that warm glow? Crackling fire, cinnamon in the air, kids bouncing off the walls, waiting for some jolly old man in a red suit to magically squeeze himself down a chimney. Yeah, forget all that. Because in a certain corner of medieval Europe, if you were waiting for Santa Claus, the guy coming to your door wasn't fat, wasn't jolly, and definitely wasn't smelling of gingerbread. He smelled more like iron and blood. Because, surprise, your Santa was the Hangman, that's right. The only man in the village available to hand out gifts, if we can even call them that, was also the one who spent most of his working hours testing rope strength and making sure the trapdoor didn't jam. Imagine the kids' faces when they heard bells on Christmas Eve, only to open the door and see that guy. Half his job was public execution, the other half, spreading holiday cheer. And people today complain about getting socks as presents. Now, before you roll your eyes and think, oh, come on, you're exaggerating for the sake of a spooky Christmas story. Nope. In many medieval villages, the hangman was a kind of social outcast. Nobody wanted to shake his hand. Nobody wanted him near their food. And yet, when December rolled around, there he was, dragging his heavy boots through the snow, sack over his shoulder, except the sack wasn't filled with toys. It was filled with whatever scraps the townsfolk had thrown together. Dried fruit, a hunk of bread, maybe a carved wooden toy if some guilt-ridden villager decided to show mercy. Picture it. You're 7 years old, tucked under a pile of itchy wool blankets, and your mother whispers, "Go to sleep, or the hangman Santa won't come." Not because he'd skip your house, but because you really didn't want to meet him while awake. His hands were thick, calloused, permanently smelling of tar and hemp. His beard wasn't snowy white. It was patchy, greasy, with little icicles clinging to it. And his voice, oh, it was the exact opposite of a jolly ho ho ho. More like a hoarse cough mixed with a growl, the kind of sound you hear right before an executioner reads the last rites. And here's the cruel twist. If you were a good child, you got a little treat. A sweetmeat, a carved trinket, maybe a shiny coin. If you were naughty, well, Santa the Hangman didn't leave you cold, he left you rope. A little piece, carefully knotted. Just a friendly reminder of what could happen if you kept lying, stealing, or mouthing off to your elders. Talk about psychological warfare wrapped up as a family tradition. But let's not act like our modern Christmas is all candy canes and joy either. Because right now, you're lying in bed, trying to relax, listening to this story, pretending you're just here for a boring Christmas sleep video. Except your brain won't shut up, will it? It's picturing that medieval cottage, the freezing draft slipping under the door, the smell of unwashed bodies and smoked meat lingering in the rafters. You hear it, the slow crunch of boots in the snow. Not reindeer hooves, boots, heavy, purposeful, getting closer. And this is where I remind you, sarcastically of course, that you should totally subscribe to this channel. Because hey, if you don't, maybe the Hangman Santa skips your house this year. Or worse, maybe he doesn't. And check the pinned comment too, because unlike those medieval kids, you can actually buy yourself a Christmas calendar that doesn't smell like rope and despair. Unless you're into that. No judgment. Anyway, back to the scene. The knock at the door comes dull and heavy, not a cheerful ding-dong. The door creaks open, and the silhouette fills the frame. A bulky figure in a hood, face shadowed, breath steaming like smoke from a forge. Kids shrink into corners, mothers force fake smiles, fathers mutter polite greetings because, let's be real, nobody wants to insult the guy who knows exactly how long a neck takes to snap. And yet, there's this weird irony in it. For that one night, the hangman wasn't the most feared man in the village. He was tolerated, even welcomed. Because Christmas, even back then, needed some form of ritual, some excuse to soften the brutal winter. And if the only guy available to play the role of gift-bringer was the same man who executed your cousin last spring, well, so be it. Better him than nobody. Humans are great at compartmentalizing horror when they're desperate for comfort. But you sitting there listening, trying to drift off, you're not feeling comfort, are you? You're picturing him trudging closer, the crunch of snow underfoot matching the rhythm of your pulse. You're wondering, if Santa Claus was a hangman, what would he bring you? Rope? A dagger? A little carved toy stained darker than oak should ever look? Or maybe he'd bring nothing, and just stand there, staring, until you squirmed under the weight of his silence. And that, my friend, is exactly why this story is going to be a long night for you. Because once you let the thought in, once you imagine Christmas not as cozy lights and cocoa, but as cold dread and a knock at the door, you can't unimagine it. The thing about medieval villages is they were quiet. Not peaceful quiet, but that eerie, oppressive silence where the only sounds are the wind rattling loose shutters and the occasional cough from someone trying not to die of pneumonia in the corner. So when the Hangman Santa came down the road, everybody knew. The silence amplified every detail. The clinking of the iron buckle on his belt, the hiss of snow compressing under his boots, the faint metallic creak of the tools he carried, whether he wanted to or not. There was no mistaking him, and still the ritual went on. The villagers would leave offerings at their doors. Some loaves of bread gone stale but still edible, a jug of ale that tasted half like vinegar already, or scraps of cloth, anything that could be tossed into the sack so the hangman had something to gift the children. Because heaven forbid the kids grow up without a Christmas memory. No, no, no. Better to traumatize them early with a rope-handled Santa than to let them think the world was kind. You, of course, are lying there listening, maybe trying to close your eyes, but the mental picture won't stop forming. The cottage walls flickering orange from a low fire, shadows crawling across the beams like spiders. You can smell the mix. Wood smoke, sweat, damp straw, maybe the faint sourness of cabbage soup left simmering too long. It's not cozy, it's suffocating. And then thud, 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 the knock comes. Not a gentle tap, but the kind of knock that announces, you're going to open this door whether you like it or not. The father of the house gets up, muttering under his breath. He knows what's expected. He swings the door open, icy wind knifing its way inside, and there he is, the hangman, not smiling, not talking, just standing, his hood shadowing his face, the only visible parts his cracked lips and that beard with little icicles clinging like decorations no one asked for. His breath clouds the air, the sack is slung over his shoulder, and for 1 second everyone inside is frozen. Then comes the performance. He steps in, drops the sack to the floor with a wet, heavy sound, and kneels to pull something out. The kids, against their better judgment, lean closer. Their wide eyes flick from the sack to his hands, praying silently that tonight isn't the night he decides to play a different kind of game. He pulls out a doll, roughly carved, one eye painted on, the other side of the face scarred where the knife slipped. He hands it to the youngest. No words, just a nod. The child clutches it, pretending not to notice the smear of something dark near the base. Next, he fishes out a hunk of dried fruit, barely more than a rock. He gives it to the older boy, who swallows hard and forces a thank you. The mother tries to smile, tries to make this scene into something normal, but the tension is like thick smoke in the room. Everybody knows this man's day job. Everybody remembers seeing him on the scaffold, tightening knots, adjusting the lever. And yet here he is playing Santa, and maybe the most disturbing part, for some of the kids it actually worked. For them, Christmas wasn't about joy, it was about survival. If the hangman gave you something, anything, it meant you were still safe. It meant he acknowledged you, spared you, let you exist another year. That twisted sense of gratitude, the relief of not being punished, became its own kind of holiday cheer. Meanwhile, you, still listening, can feel that same dissonance creeping under your skin. It's like when you walk into a room where everyone just had an argument, but they're pretending everything's fine. That sticky, invisible tension, the kind that clings even if you're not there. And you can't help but imagine it. The way the hangman shifts, his boots leaving melted puddles of snow on the floorboards, his hands awkward as he reaches again into the sack. What will he pull out next? Sometimes it was a token of mercy, a coin, a candle stub, a charm carved into bone to ward off sickness. But sometimes, he'd pull out the rope, a short length, neatly tied into a noose, and he wouldn't say anything, but everyone in the room would know who it was for. The father who'd been late with taxes, the son caught stealing grain, the mother who whispered too loudly against the lord of the manor. The rope wasn't just a gift, it was a warning, a promise that the hangman's duties didn't end with Christmas cheer. And tell me, you think you'd sleep well in that kind of tradition? You think kids cuddled up with their rope present the way modern kids hug a teddy bear? Or did they stare at it all night, wide-eyed, too afraid to blink in case Santa the Hangman decided to come back and finish the job? Of course, history doesn't record every detail. We don't have medieval diaries of children scrawling, "Dear Journal, today Santa gave me rope, 10-10 traumatic experience, would not recommend." But oral traditions, local legends, they carried this unease forward. The memory of a Christmas where joy and dread were served from the same sack. And as you lie here, maybe drifting a little, maybe not, your brain can't decide if this is a horror story or a lullaby. The rhythm of boots in the snow keeps tapping in your ears, steady, 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 like a metronome pulling you deeper. And still you wonder, if he were standing outside your door tonight, sack in hand, what would he bring you? Here's the cruelest part about having the hangman as your Santa. The line between ritual and threat was blurry. Imagine being a kid, clutching your little wooden toy or your dried fruit, but in the back of your mind you knew this man wasn't a fantasy. He wasn't a story your parents told you to behave. He was real. You saw him in daylight. You saw the ropes swinging in the square. You saw the crowd holding their breath as the lever dropped. And now he was in your house, his shadow stretching across your bed, his breath clouding in the firelight. Parents back then didn't need to invent Krampus or make up elaborate stories about naughty lists. They had the hangman. That was more than enough to scare obedience into their children. One glare from him and every lie, every stolen crumb of bread, every whisper of rebellion came flooding back into the child's memory. The magic of Christmas was nothing more than sheer relief when he finally walked out the door and left the family intact. And let's be honest, what's scarier than a man who can switch roles so easily? Executioner by day, holiday figure by night. The same hands that tightened the noose were the ones handing out your Christmas doll. The same boots that stomped across the scaffold now stomped across your living room. There was no separation. It was all one person, one presence, one shadow looming over the village. Now you, still here, still listening, can't help but glance at your own door, can you? It's ridiculous, of course, totally irrational. You know this is just a story, and yet the image clings. The muffled crunch of footsteps in the snow stopping right outside. The long pause before the knock. That weighty silence, like the whole world holding its breath. The knock doesn't even need to happen. You already hear it in your head. Thud, thud, thud. And when it does, because it always does, you picture opening the door just a crack. The cold rushes in first, biting at your skin. Then the shadow fills the gap. He doesn't smile, he doesn't speak. He just tilts his head slowly, deliberately, as though he's deciding whether you deserve a gift or a rope. Your throat goes dry, your heart hammering in your chest louder than the wind outside. And for a second you wish it really was a jolly fat man with a red suit and a sack of toys. But no, you got him instead. The villagers learned to treat it like a twisted kind of blessing. If the hangman gave you something, anything, it meant you'd made it through the year. You hadn't angered him, you hadn't crossed the Lord, you hadn't stepped too far out of line. His presence at your door was proof of survival, and survival was the only real gift most people ever got in those winters. So when he finally left, boots crunching again into the snow, the air inside the cottage was different. Lighter, maybe, but not exactly joyful. More like everyone could exhale again, just for a moment. The kids would clutch their gifts and pretend to be happy. The parents would mutter thanks to whatever saints they thought were listening, and then they'd bolt the door tight, praying he wouldn't return until next year. And maybe, just maybe, some of them actually slept better with the rope hanging by their bed. Not because it was comforting, but because it reminded them of the boundary, the rules, the thin thread keeping them alive in a world that didn't care if they froze or starved. The rope wasn't just a threat, it was a symbol. And in the darkest winter nights when the wind howled like wolves outside, even a symbol was something to hold on to. But you don't get to hold on to anything. You just lie there drifting between wakefulness and dreams, caught in that half space where the shadows in your room look suspiciously like figures in hoods. Your ears trick you with phantom sounds, a knock that never comes, the scrape of boots across a floor that isn't there. Your brain keeps whispering, what if? What if the hangman Santa wasn't just a story? What if he remembers every child who ever whispered his name in fear? What if right now, while you're trying so hard to relax, he's already on his way? You can almost see it. The road stretched out, the snow falling heavy and quiet, his silhouette trudging step by step, sack dragging at his side. He doesn't rush. He doesn't need to. He always arrives. Maybe not tonight, maybe not tomorrow, but eventually. And when he does, you'll know. Because the knock is never gentle and the shadow is never mistaken for anyone else's. And here's the kicker. You can tell yourself this is just a spooky Christmas story for sleep, just background noise. But the more you picture it, the more real it becomes. The smell of cold rope, the creak of leather gloves, the pause before the door opens, all of it stitched into your imagination now. Congratulations, you've basically invited the Hangman Santa into your head. Good luck falling asleep with him standing there. You'd think people eventually got used to it. You'd think after years of the same ritual, boots in the snow, sack at the door, silent nods, the villagers would stop flinching when the hangman appeared. But no, fear doesn't soften with repetition, it sharpens. Every visit was like a blade scraping across the same wound, deeper each time. And if anything, the ritual only grew heavier as the years dragged on. Because here's the secret no one said out loud. The hangman liked it, not in a cheerful, jolly, I love Christmas kind of way, more in the quiet satisfaction of power. The scaffold gave him authority, but Christmas gave him intimacy. On the platform, he looked down at the condemned. At Christmas, he stood in their homes. He saw the fear in their eyes at arm's length. He heard their children's whispers. He watched mothers press trembling hands against their lips, fathers stiffen their jaws. It was the same fear, but sweeter somehow. You're lying there now, maybe rolling onto your side, trying to shrug off the thought. But it lingers. Imagine the look in his eyes when he handed over a toy carved from leftover scaffold wood, or when he slid a rope length across the table and left it there like a silent dare. He didn't need to say a word. The rope said it all. I can take everything from you whenever I choose. And still, people called it Christmas. The strangeness of it is hard to shake. Think of the contrasts. Outside, snow covering the village in a white blanket, the illusion of purity and peace. Inside, the smell of sweat, smoke, and fear. Outside, children whispering about St. Nicholas or legends of angels. Inside, the man who dragged criminals to their deaths dropping a sack on your floor. It's like decorating a gallows with mistletoe and pretending it's festive. But that's humanity for you. Give us enough suffering, enough hunger, enough winter nights where the only warmth is borrowed from a dying fire, and we'll turn anything into tradition, even dread, maybe especially dread, because dread keeps you awake. It keeps you alert. It teaches you where the lines are. And in the medieval world, stepping out of line was the difference between seeing another Christmas or swinging above the square. And so the hangman became not just a figure of punishment, but a twisted guardian of the holiday. His shadow over the threshold was both curse and comfort. The sack he carried wasn't full of toys. It was full of reminders. Be good. Stay in place. Survive another year. Now tell me, what would you rather? The truth of that world or the lie of ours? We dress Santa up in velvet. We sing cheerful songs. We stuff stockings with candy and gadgets. We hide the fear. But maybe the hangman version was more honest. Maybe it's better to know that the man bringing you gifts could just as easily bring the rope. At least then you never forget what's waiting in the shadows. And isn't that what you feel right now? That weight in your chest. That twitch in your ear every time you think you hear footsteps outside? Don't lie. You've glanced at your door already. You've thought about how easy it would be for someone to stand there, silent, just waiting. That's the curse of stories like this. They sneak into your head and make the ordinary terrifying. A creak in the walls, a gust against the window. Suddenly it isn't wind anymore. It's boots. Boots in the snow. Steady, deliberate, closer and closer. The villagers knew that sound. It was impossible to ignore. Children would hide under straw blankets, biting their lips to keep from whimpering. Parents would force themselves upright, rehearsing polite gratitude, even though their stomachs twisted with nausea. And when the knock came, 3 dull thuds, it echoed not just in the walls, but in their bones. And then the door opened. Always the same. Always that shape in the threshold. A blur of hood, frost and silence. The hangman didn't need bells. He didn't need laughter. He carried his presence like a weapon, and he knew, deep down, that he owned them all. You, on the other hand, you're still awake. Maybe pretending you're drifting, but your mind is sharper now than it was 5 minutes ago. Because whether you like it or not, you've started wondering if the Hangman Santa walked into your room tonight, what would he bring you? Would he hand you a gift? Or would he place something heavier on the edge of your bed? Something rough, something knotted, and leave without a word? And when you wake in the morning, would you even dare look to see if it was still there? You tell yourself fear is irrational, then spend the next minute listening for proof that it's rational anyway. That's how it worked in the village. Everyone pretended the ritual was wholesome, then scanned the dark for any excuse to stay terrified. The market square helped keep the illusion. By day, it looked almost friendly. Stalls leaning like sleepy cattle, salted fish hanging beside turnips that dreamed of better soil. A brazier coughing sparks, while a boy rotated chestnuts with a stick he'd carved from a ruined yoke. Men haggled, women scolded, babies announced their grievances. The square murmured like a tired beehive, pretending winter wasn't winning. But the scaffold stood there too, thin and patient, throwing a bony shadow that stretched over everything like a warning finger. You could buy ginger if you were lucky, wool if you were rich, and lies if you were desperate. The lie most people wanted was simple. Christmas would make the world behave. The hangman's presence said otherwise. Even when he was absent, you could feel his outline, like heat that lingers after a fire dies. People kept wishing, though. Wishing is stubborn. He had a name, of course, though you don't need to know it. Names make people feel softer, and softness didn't fit him. The priest used his name during blessings because the priest believed in categories, and the hangman never fit any. He sat at the back of the church like a stain nobody could scrub out. Heavy cloak steaming near the door, hood lowered just enough to prove he wasn't a spectre. When hymns climbed the rafters, he didn't sing. He watched the beams and the candles and the lips of people who pretended not to glance at him. Confession nights went late around Advent. Sin poured cheap and quick when the snow set. The priest's ears throbbed with secrets, some petty, some boiling, all carried like splinters. The hangman didn't confess. He waited in the vestibule, body turned toward the exit in case anyone decided to run. No one ever did. The priest told himself that meant virtue was winning. The hangman knew better. Fear was doing the heavy lifting. Children tracked him without meaning to. They always do. Kids develop a map of threat long before they can read. They knew which step on the square's stairs squealed, which taproom door hid a dog that bit, which widow fed pigeons with bread too old even for pigeons. They knew the hangman's stride by sound alone. It had a rhythm to it, a practical, unforgiving meter, like a poem about gravity. One girl in particular, dark-haired and stubborn, kept count each year from the first snow to the ritual night. She believed the number meant something, as if mathematics could bargain with fate. Some winters she got 44, some 39, once 51. She wrote the counts with a charcoal nub on the underside of a stool, where her mother wouldn't find them, and panic. On the night he finally knocked, she sat on that stool and pressed her thumb to the newest number until the charcoal stained her nail and made it look dead. You try to sleep and can't. She tries to sit still and can't. You share a nervous system separated by centuries. Her house smelled like boiled onions, ash, wool grease, and the skinny soup that pretended to be thicker when you closed your eyes. A wind kept nosing the shutter latch, testing it. The hinge croaked in a voice that didn't learn its lesson. Her brother lay with his mouth open, dreaming of hot bread. The mother scraped the pot politely so the iron wouldn't feel taken for granted. The father polished a single spoon with a rag and pretended the act was sacred. Then the boots. Not a surprise, never a surprise. You know the sound is coming and still jump when it arrives. There are knocks that ask. There are knocks that beg. His knocks didn't either. They announced. The girl's stomach flipped the way a bird flips when it meets a cold window. The father opened the door like a man pulling a tooth from his own mouth. He filled the space the way winter fills a valley, completely, without apology. Snow had crusted along the fringe of his cloak, turning wool into frozen bark. His hood made a small cave around his face, enough to keep his breath from escaping before it served its purpose. He didn't look at the father first. He looked past him to the hearth, gauging fire, habit, danger. Then to the children. The reflex of a man who believed futures announced themselves early. He set the sack down. It made the sound clotted cloth makes, soft, sullen, resigned. The girl gripped the stool seat until the edge bit her palm, as if making a mouth there would help swallow the moment. From the sack he drew a wax taper, stubby and yellow, with bits of straw trapped inside like little skeletons of summer. He placed it on the table. The mother whispered thanks as if any higher volume would accuse her of greed. Next came a handful of dried plums, wrinkled like secrets that had been held too long. He gave those to the boy, who tried to bow and half succeeded, before remembering how kneecaps work. The rope didn't appear yet. The room understood that and didn't relax. He reached again, pulled out a carving. Not a doll this time. A little horse, mane cross-hatched with impatient lines. one leg shorter than the rest, so it tilted like a drunk learning humility. He slid it toward the girl. She didn't move. He waited. She reached. The wood felt warmer than it had any right to feel, as if the shape remembered the tree and liked the memory. He didn't speak, but other people's words clung to him anyway. The father forced a blessing through teeth that wanted to chatter. The mother asked after the cold, the square, the Lord's temper, the road. These weren't questions, they were decorations for fear, tinsel for dread. The hangman's eyes tracked the room the way a miller watches water, with attention that doesn't dress itself as kindness. A detail caught him. On the wall, above the hearth, a ribbon the family saved from the last fair. Red gone sleepy, edges frayed, looped into a bow that was too proud for its station. The girl followed his gaze and felt sudden embarrassment, the kind that announces itself as heat on the face. She wanted to snatch the ribbon down and hide it in her mouth. Celebration looked suspicious under his attention. The rope arrived quietly. A short-length loop knotted with the tidy competence of habit. He placed it on the table with the care people reserve for glass. No one cried. Tears belonged to warmer rooms. The father stared at the knot as if it might teach him a new language. The mother inhaled shallow, as if deep breath might give the rope more air to eat. The boy counted plums he hadn't earned yet. The girl looked at the horse and willed it to choose a different leg to be shorter. The hangman waited. Silence crushed the space between heartbeat and heartbeat until they touched. Finally, he tapped the rope once with a gloved finger, a gesture so small it felt enormous. The message didn't need grammar. Pay. Obey. Remember. He left the way he came, snow squeaking underfoot, door closing like a decision. The latch caught. The wind returned to its hobby. The mother exhaled as if someone had been standing on her chest. The father reached for the rope and didn't touch it, hand hovering like a moth reconsidering flame. The boy bit a plum and pretended it was summer. The girl set the horse on the table, pressed its uneven legs flat, and imagined a world where wood listened. You roll to your other side and try to bargain with your own house. If you keep perfectly still, maybe footsteps won't find you. The bargain tastes foolish. Outside your walls somewhere, boots measure distance with patience, they always do. And this night, like every night the ritual repeats, ends not with relief, but with that thin, slicing question that waits on the far side of the dark. What will the rope decide next? The strange thing about dread is how quickly it weaves itself into routine. By the second or third winter, most families didn't even flinch when they heard the boots in the snow. Not outwardly, at least. They had practiced the art of controlled breathing, of steady smiles that looked rehearsed but not too rehearsed. Children were coached in silence, no squeals, no cries, no laughter, because any sound could tip the moment into something else. And so the hangman's ritual became part of Christmas the way candles, bread and song did, except his candle was stubby, his bread stale, and his song never came. But routine doesn't mean comfort. No matter how many years it happened, the rope never stopped being heavy. Its meaning was never ambiguous. Families lived in the shadow of it for months after. You could see it in the way people moved in the square, straighter, quieter, careful not to step out of rhythm. The children who once believed in miracles now believed in knots, and maybe that belief kept them alive. Fear, after all, is one of the best teachers. You're lying here telling yourself this is only a story, that you'll let the rhythm of my voice pull you toward sleep. But your brain isn't cooperating, is it? Because you've already pictured your own version of the rope. Not medieval hemp, but something modern. A phone charger dangling near your bed, a cord tangled on the floor, a belt hanging off a chair. Harmless things suddenly look like symbols, and symbols don't sleep when you do. Back in the village, people whispered about whether the hangman chose who got what, or if someone told him. Did the lord of the manor slip him instructions? Did the priest nudge him toward certain homes? Or was the rope simply his own decision, guided by a ledger only he could read? Nobody dared ask, but the questions lingered like smoke. The girl with the crooked wooden horse thought about it often. She traced the uneven legs with her thumb until the wood went shiny. She wondered if the horse had come from pity or from some obscure justice. Maybe he saw her counting steps on the stool, and the horse was a reply. I see you counting, little one. Count me too. She both hated and cherished that thought, because it meant he noticed her. And notice was dangerous. The rope from that year stayed on the family's table longer than it should have. The father said it was a warning, so it had to be visible. The mother said it was a curse, so it had to be burned. They argued until their voices cracked, then stopped, because what if he heard them? In the end, they kept it. Not because they agreed, but because fear kept the rope stronger than fire. And every time they sat down to eat their thin soup, the rope watched. It watched the boy's plums shrink, the mother's hands tremble, the father's jaw tighten, the girl's eyes flick between her horse and the knot. It became part of the meal, part of the prayer, part of the silence afterward. You, of course, are having your own silent meal right now. A taste of dread, a sip of unease. No actual rope in your room, and yet you feel one anyway. Maybe you even imagine where it would sit. On your desk, on your chair, draped across your blanket, like some twisted decoration. You won't admit it out loud, but the image has already landed. And once an image lands, it doesn't leave. That's what those villagers knew best. Fear doesn't vanish, it nests. The hangman knew it too. That's why he never needed words. His gifts carried meanings louder than any sermon. A stub of candle said, "Your light is running out." A handful of plums said, "You may last another season if you ration well." A horse said, "Play if you dare, but your toy won't stand straight." And the rope said nothing because silence has always been the cruelest language. One winter, the knock came later than usual. The wind howled for hours before the boots arrived. The children dozed off, then woke, then dozed again, each time expecting the thud of the door. When it finally came, the rhythm was different, slower, heavier, as if each knock was dragged out of stone. The father hesitated, hand trembling on the latch. And in that hesitation, the children realized something they'd never thought before. What if he didn't bring the sack at all? What if this year he didn't stop at the table? The door opened. Snow hissed into the room. The hangman stood there longer than usual, cloak stiff with frost, hood lower than ever. For a moment no one breathed. Then he stepped in, sack slamming to the ground with a thud that rattled the bowls. The boy whimpered before his mother's hand clamped down on his shoulder. The girl gripped her wooden horse so hard she thought it might splinter. And that night, the sack wasn't opened. He left it there, untouched, the way a dog leaves a bone in front of another dog as a test. He left without a word, without a gesture, only the scrape of boots across the threshold. The door shut, the wind reclaimed its space. Inside, the family stared at the sack as if it might move. Nobody touched it. Not that night, not the next morning. Days passed. Hunger eventually won, as hunger always does. The father opened it, slow, careful, as though a serpent might leap out. Inside was no candle, no plums, no toy, only rope, coiled, heavy, waiting. Enough rope to bind every wrist in the house, and that's the kind of Christmas memory no child forgets. You try to picture the inside of that sack again, don't you? The weight of it, the way the cloth sagged like skin over a bruise. Everyone in the village learned to read that weight. A heavy slump meant food if the year was merciful. A tight coil meant rope if it wasn't. And after the night he left nothing but coils. The square walked quieter, like the whole place wore soft shoes. Even laughter sounded guilty. As if joy might be a punishable offense, it probably was. "Merry Christmas," they'd say with their mouths. "Careful now," their eyes added. See? Festive. Speaking of careful, hit subscribe while you still have fingers enough to press the button and check the pinned comment for the calendar. It's the only holiday countdown that doesn't end in a knot, unless you want it to, in which case, yikes. But also, thank you for supporting the channel. Rituals survive because they are useful. This one disciplined the whole village better than any sermon. When you live beneath a winter sky that forgets to move, you need rules to carve the days into something you can carry. The hangman gave them a clock that ticked with boots and a calendar that turned on fear. He didn't invent the season, he framed it. Peace on earth became peace and keep your head. And yet, there was tenderness at the edges. A mother tucking a taper into a chipped cup and calling it a lantern. A father smoothing a girl's hair with the kind of gentleness men reserve for rooms where they aren't certain they'll survive. Even the rope gave families a subject to agree on when everything else started arguments. "We want to live," said the rope. "Then do as you're told," said the world. The girl with the crooked wooden horse kept it near, even after that sack full of coils turned their table into a warning altar. She learned to balance the toy by wedging a splinter under its short leg, a cheat she pretended was carpentry. That's how people function under dread. They invent little cheats and call it craftsmanship, tiny rebellions that don't look like rebellion. She counted the hangman's steps through the winter again, charcoal marking fresh numbers on the underside of that stool until the wood looked like night. Each mark said, "I'm still here." Each step outside replied, "For now." She didn't hate him. It would have been easier if she had. Hate wastes heat, and heat is precious. She felt something smaller and more durable, a tension with claws. There was gossip about who the rope belonged to that year. Some said the father. He had a temper that sometimes took the room by the throat. Some said the mother. She'd spoken too openly about the Lord's tax collector and how his hands celebrated too often. A few whispered it was for the boy, because he'd been caught pocketing a turnip and laughing with his mouth full, which is the worst way to laugh. No one accused the girl, not because she was innocent, but because she was invisible in the way only quiet children are. People think quiet is safe. Quiet can be a sword if you lean it right. Meanwhile, the hangman kept his rounds, and the world matched his rhythm. The priest added a colder phrase to the Advent liturgy, something about the wages of sin and the wage collector's punctuality. The baker stopped giving credit. The miller measured flour with a new caution that turned friendship into dust. Even the sparrows grew conservative, landing only where the wind couldn't surprise them. The square became a theatre whose audience sat on stage and pretended the play was about someone else. And always, out of the corner of your ear, the boots, the practical poem that rhymes with ending. One evening, when the sky looked like the inside of a pewter pot, the girl wandered to the churchyard and found the hangman fixing a hinge on the lich gate. Imagine that. The man who broke necks repairing a door so mourners could enter politely. He worked with the calm of someone rearranging furniture in a room that belongs to him. She didn't hide. That surprised her. He looked up once, the briefest snowfall of attention, and returned to the hinge. The horse sat in her pocket like a heartbeat. She studied his tools. A file with teeth gone patient, a hammer with a chip that had learned humility. The world gathers scars and then calls itself experienced. He finished, tested the swing, nodded to nobody, and started to leave. That's when she said it, the smallest word Winter could afford. "Thank you." He stopped, not because gratitude stunned him, but because gratitude from a child is usually a dress that hides something else. He waited. She pulled the horse from her pocket and held it out with two hands, the gesture people use when offering anything that is both precious and failing. He shook his head. Not refusal, correctness. Gifts travel one direction when you live under a rope. She held it closer, defiance burning small and clean. He studied the carving as if searching it for a blueprint. Then, with a gloved thumb, he pressed near the short leg until the wood sighed and gave a little, as if the horse remembered how to stand straight for a moment. He handed it back. The fix was temporary, but then so is every fix. He said nothing. When he left, the gate didn't creak. Nights lengthened the way bad habits do, slowly, convincingly, until you can't remember any other shape. The family learned to eat while the rope watched them, and to sleep while the rope rehearsed the air above their beds. The boy developed a cough that sounded like a broom arguing with a corner. The mother braided her hair so tight it taught her scalp to obey. The father started speaking to the spoon he polished, asking it not to turn into a shovel. The girl counted the silence between wind and wall and discovered something awful. The longest silence wasn't outside. It lived in people right where singing should be. You don't escape stories like this, you outlast them. Or you don't. Either way, you participate. Right now, you're participating by listening, by pretending you're only chasing sleep when you're really chasing the knock you're sure your door won't make. The hangman's gift isn't the rope, it's the ability to hear footsteps in carpet. That's why the ritual thrived. It exported dread. He didn't have to be present to be present. He colonized the mind, taxed attention, collected quiet. His empire did not need maps. It needed nights. So when the next Christmas approached, the village prepared with more discipline than hope. Candles were trimmed to a stub's ambition. Bread was sliced so thin the knife apologized. The square performed cheer the way a soldier performs a parade step, memorized, exact, dead behind the eyes. And still, somewhere inside every person, a small, stupid ember kept whispering that maybe this year would be kind. That's the human heresy the rope never manages to hang. Hope keeps wriggling, keeps kicking, keeps sticking its tongue out at the gallows. The hangman knew. He had learned to account for it. He carried extra rope. Hope was dangerous, but it leaked everywhere. The baker's wife tied scraps of ribbon to the stall posts, claiming they would keep the wind from stealing loaves. The shepherd's boy hummed songs his grandmother taught him, songs so old they might have been lullabies or curses. Even the priest slipped extra drops of wine into the chalice, muttering that God's mercy had no measure. People performed these little rebellions as if the hangman couldn't see them, but he always did. He saw everything. You don't walk a village every week without learning how its skin twitches. The girl with the crooked horse kept listening for boots. Not because she feared them, but because silence was worse. Silence was a question with teeth. At least footsteps meant the answer was arriving. She carried her horse everywhere, the leg now bent in a way that almost passed for straight. Sometimes she pressed it to her cheek and imagined it was warm. Sometimes she pressed it to her ear, as if it could whisper whether she would see the next winter. Children are excellent at inventing oracles. And you've already invented your own, haven't you? You hear a floorboard creak, a radiator click, a branch tapping glass, and your brain decides it's an omen. You tell yourself you're too old to be scared of stories, then double-check the lock anyway. Don't worry, that's normal. Fear is a ritual too. It lives in repetition. It kneels at the altar of every sound you can't explain. And tonight you're kneeling whether you like it or not. The winter deepened until even the river gave up, its surface hard as bone. That's when the hangman's power reached its fullest. The Lord in his manor could command soldiers, but soldiers couldn't force the river to flow. The priest could command souls, but souls didn't boil soup. Only the hangman could command silence, and silence is the strongest currency in winter. When he knocked, no one hesitated anymore. Doors opened before the third thud. Delay looked too much like defiance. That year he carried a lantern, not bright, just a dull glow that painted his hood in gold rust. People whispered about it. Some said the Lord gave it to him, a mark of favor. Others claimed he found it in a ruined abbey, that it burned with a flame stolen from the devil's kitchen. Whatever the truth, the lantern changed everything. You could see him coming down the road long before you heard the boots. A moving star, except this one dragged shadow behind it instead of light. The girl watched from her stool, breath fogging the window glass. She counted the steps and matched them to the flicker. 1, 2, 3. Her charcoal numbers already etched into the stool's belly. When the glow finally reached their door, her father didn't wait. He opened it wide, bowing as if greeting royalty. The hangman stepped in, lantern swinging at his side, casting long, violent shapes on the walls. The sack dropped. The rope inside groaned. This time, he pulled nothing from it. Instead, he set the lantern on the table. Its light was tired but steady. The flame barely moved, as if afraid to breathe too deeply. The family stared at it, confused. A gift, yes, but also a presence. Unlike a toy or fruit, it couldn't be hidden away. The lantern would burn until it chose to stop. The girl's brother reached toward it, but the mother caught his wrist. The hangman saw and didn't intervene. He just stood there, letting the flame judge them. That night, the family didn't eat. They sat around the lantern, waiting. For what, they weren't sure. Maybe for it to go out. Maybe for the rope to leap free of the sack. The father cleared his throat once, but the sound died like a bird striking glass. The mother hummed, but the melody slipped sideways wrong. The girl held her horse under the table, pressing its bent leg into the dirt as if pinning herself to the earth. The lantern burned on, and when he left, he didn't take it with him. He left the flame as if to say, "You're watched even in my absence." The door closed, the boots crunched, the wind howled again. But the lantern stayed, and its glow turned every shadow in the house into a shape that looked like him. They tried covering it with cloth, but the light bled through. They tried setting it outside, but the wind refused to snuff it. Finally, they gave up. The lantern lived with them now, a permanent guest. Imagine that. Every night you sleep, a reminder sitting there glowing, telling you the hangman never really leaves. That's what dread becomes when it matures. It doesn't need to knock anymore. It just lingers. And tell me, would you dare blow it out? You don't live with a lantern, you live under it. That's what the family learned by the third night. The flame didn't brighten the room so much as interrogate it. Everything near the light confessed its shape. The crack in the bowl, the chip in the spoon, the grime the mother always swore she'd scrub tomorrow. The rope on the table looked almost polite in that glow, looped like a napkin at a nobleman's feast. The girl slept facing the lantern because turning her back on it felt like turning her back on a cliff. Her wooden horse threw a hunched shadow that seemed to chew the edge of the table. The brother whispered to the light, as if it were a priest with a shorter line. The father measured his words the way the miller measured grain, stingy, cautious, and the mother started speaking to the empty chair, the one where her own mother used to sit, as if the dead could negotiate with fire. "You're doing your own negotiation, aren't you? If I keep listening, I'll sleep. If I sleep, the lantern can't see me. That's not how light works." But fear never needed physics to feel right. "Look, small favor. Tap subscribe like you're snuffing a candle with 2 fingers. Quick, decisive, satisfying. And check the pinned comment for the calendar, the only countdown that lets you cross off days without crossing a line around your neck." There, transaction done. Now back to the interrogation. The village changed under that traveling star. The hangman still did his rounds, but he didn't have to knock as hard. Doors opened faster, eyes dropped sooner. People began trimming their words before they spoke them, carving the conversation down to splinters. Jokes died in the throat like birds in a blizzard. Even the priest's sermons shortened, as if mercy itself had a curfew. Children stopped playing in the square and developed a new game indoors. Don't look at the lantern. You lose if you glance. No one ever won. At first, the lantern felt like a test. Later, it felt like law. When it sat in your house, you cooked quieter. You argued softer. You prayed in the careful way people do when they're trying not to wake a sleeping animal. But the strangest effect came on the 5th night. The flame clicked. Just once, a tiny metallic tick inside the glass, and everyone in the room flinched as if the light had spoken their name. The mother dropped a bowl. The father said a curse he hadn't used since his wedding night. The boy laughed, high and brittle, then slapped his own mouth as if to arrest the sound before it traveled. The girl simply stared, because staring is the only resistance that doesn't make noise. After the tick, the flame leaned left, just a hair. You wouldn't notice if you weren't waiting to notice, but they were. The father adjusted the lantern, turning it so the wick faced straight again. The flame leaned left a second time, stubborn as a mule. It wasn't a draft. The shutters were sealed, the chinks stuffed with rag. The flame chose. The mother said it meant disaster from the west. The boy insisted it pointed toward the miller, who once shorted their flour by a thumb's width. The girl held her horse and thought of the churchyard hinge and the patient way the hangman's hands solved problems. She wondered what direction his attention leaned when he wasn't in a room. The next day, word spread. The Lord Steward had been found dead beyond the western gate, face down in snow so clean it looked ceremonial. People did what people do. They braided coincidence into prophecy. The lantern leaned. The steward died. A line was drawn between those 2 dots so quickly it might as well have been a noose. Houses that hadn't taken their lanterns seriously now did. Some families fed their flame crumbs of bread, so it wouldn't grow hungry and eat us. Others polished the glass with the hem of their sleeves, praying their reflection would look obedient enough to pass. And a few decided to outstare the light. Pride doesn't like surveillance. Pride always loses to it anyway. At dusk, the hangman passed through the square with that steady, unhurried stride. The lantern swung at his side like a pocket sun, tired of its job. He paused at the well. People who had no business at the well suddenly remembered business elsewhere. The baker's wife dropped a ribbon and left it where it fell. The priest put his hand on the stone lip and pretended to bless water that didn't need him. The hangman looked inside the well as if it might answer questions. Then he turned toward the road that led to the western gate. The lantern's light clawed at the snow and made a path you could follow with your eyes closed. You think you wouldn't follow? You think you'd stay inside with a blanket and the happy lie that other people's rituals can't bruise you. But your ears already know the weight of those boots. Your mind already holds the shape of that sack. You're tethered to this procession, whether you step into the snow or not. That's the trick of stories like this. They hitch your attention to the rope and walk. The girl did what children with disobedient souls do. She left the house after dark. The wooden horse rode her pocket like a talisman that believed in her more than she believed in herself. She moved along frozen edges where snow creaked less, where moonlight remembered to be gentler. At the western gate, she found tracks. One set deep and patient. Another set, light, hurried, many feet, stopping and starting like questions no one wanted to finish asking. Beyond the gate, the hangman stood with his lantern held near the ground, surveying the script Winter had written. He knew she was there. Of course he did. Children imagine they're invisible because adults are kind enough to pretend. He didn't turn. He said nothing. He simply raised the lantern an inch, and the flame leaned left again. She followed the lean with her eyes, and saw it. A ribbon half buried in the drift, the same red as the one in her house. For a blink, the world folded. Her table's light, the square's gossip, the steward's face in the snow, that hinge that no longer squeaked. Everything fit. Not neatly. Nothing in this village fit neatly, but it fit enough to be swallowed. "Is it a warning?" she meant to ask. Her mouth made no sound. The hangman bent and lifted the ribbon. Ice cracked like old bone. He held the strip toward her without turning, an offering that tasted like accusation. She took it. It was stiff with cold, rough where fingers had worried it thin. In the lantern glow, it looked almost alive, a vein in the palm of winter. She tucked it into her sleeve because pockets are too honest. They stood like that. Two figures, one light, a road that didn't hurry. The snow fell steady, patient, indifferent. The world loves indifference. It's the only thing that can bear all our stories without collapsing. Finally he moved. Not toward her, not away. Just forward, the way a rule moves. She followed at a distance measured in heartbeats. At the ditch, just past the alder trees, the lantern leaned again. She peered down and found what the light already knew, a path of dragged marks where something heavy had been hauled from road to ditch, then from ditch to field, then from field to that clean patch where the steward lay, with his face pressed into whiteness, like a penitent. The girl understood nothing and everything at once. The village had been living under a lantern, but the night had one too. A darker one, with a flame that leaned toward any small wrongness like a fox nosing a chicken coop. The hangman wasn't Santa. He wasn't even the hangman, not entirely. He was the wick, the glass, the hand that kept the fire alive while the wind did its best to be wild. Behind them, a bell rang. One of those brittle winter bells the priest loved, because it sounded like holiness even when it only meant trouble. The girl turned. The hangman did not. He kept walking, lantern steady, boots exact. She wanted to ask whether her family's rope would be used this year. She wanted to ask whether the horse would ever stand true without tricks. She wanted to ask whether the flame ever leaned right. She asked none of it. She simply walked in the wake of the light, where even fear felt warm enough to touch. The road thinned into field, the field into a white sheet with rumors under it. The lantern's glow gathered the rumors and made them spell something she couldn't read. Not yet. The hangman stopped at the boundary stone, the one every child is told not to cross and every adult crosses, for reasons that sound sensible until the dark repeats them back. He lifted the lantern higher. The flame brightened like a breath held too long. Snow began to whisper, that papery sound it makes when it's deciding whether to pretend to be alive. And there, in the expanding circle of light, something moved. Slow, deliberate, not quite human in its patience. The girl gripped the horse until the wood answered with a tiny, painful crack. The hangman didn't look at her. He didn't need to. He lifted the lantern another inch, and the flame leaned so far left it nearly kissed the glass. That's when the road, your road, her road, the whole village's stubborn ribbon, stopped pretending to be safe. Snow hides many things, but never for long. It's a liar that melts too easily, a white sheet that promises purity, but always betrays the stains underneath. That night, under the hangman's lantern, the girl saw the lie unravel. What moved in the circle of light wasn't a beast exactly, nor a man entirely. It was weight. That's what she understood first. Weight. Something being pulled through the snow, something the earth didn't want to carry. The lantern leaned toward it like a curious witness. She gripped her crooked horse harder, thumb pressed against the uneven leg, until a splinter bit her skin. The hangman didn't flinch. He only adjusted the lantern, letting the flame bend lower until the moving shape revealed itself. A bundle, wrapped in cloth, bound in rope. Of course rope. Always rope. The cloth was the color of dirt under snow, gray, brown, red if you squinted. The bundle dragged as though the ground was trying to keep it. You feel your chest tighten, don't you? It's not the cold air of a medieval night creeping into your lungs. It's the recognition. Because you've seen bundles like that before, not in life maybe, but in stories, in documentaries, in the imagination that fills in gaps with things you wish it hadn't. A body is always heavier when you know it used to move, and the lantern didn't care, it just illuminated. That's the cruelest thing about light, it refuses to look away. The girl wanted to scream. Her mouth opened, but the sound froze behind her teeth. She looked at the hangman, searching for what exactly? Comfort? Permission? He gave neither. His face under the hood was unreadable, carved stone lit by fire. All he did was take one slow step forward. The bundle twitched. Not by itself, snow collapsing, rope tightening, but enough to make the girl stumble back. Her horse fell into the drift with a soft thump. "Leave it," the wind seemed to say, but she bent down and snatched it back, wood cold against her palm, as if the toy was the only anchor holding her upright. The hangman didn't stop her. He just moved closer to the bundle. His boots sank deep, each step deliberate, like punctuation in a sentence that was almost finished. And then he knelt. Imagine that. The hangman, the man who never bent for anyone, lowering himself onto one knee in the snow. His lantern swayed, flame bowing with him, casting long shadows that jittered like nervous witnesses across the trees. He touched the bundle, not to open it, not to cut it loose, just to press his glove against the rope as though checking the quality of his own work. The girl shivered, realizing what that meant. The hangman hadn't just found this bundle, he'd made it. Now you understand the irony, don't you? For children in that village, Santa didn't arrive with toys he made. He arrived with bundles he tied. His craft wasn't building, it was binding. And maybe that's why he carried the sack each Christmas, not because it was filled with gifts, but because it was filled with leftovers of the work nobody wanted to think about. The girl's heart pounded like the chapel bell when fire caught the thatch. She wanted to run. Every nerve begged her to run, but her feet stayed in the snow as if the lantern had nailed them there. The hangman finally stood, rope in hand. He didn't drag the bundle farther, didn't open it, didn't explain. He just lifted the lantern higher, letting its glow swallow both him and the shape at his feet. And here's the part that twists the knife. The girl didn't hate him for it. She understood. In her child logic, sharp as a frostbitten blade, she thought, of course Santa carries the dead. Who else would? The Lord wouldn't dirty his boots. The priest wouldn't dirty his soul. The villagers wouldn't dirty their hands. Only the hangman lived in the mud between them all. Of course he carried bundles, of course he left rope. Of course he was the one who knocked. And you, lying there in your warm bed, trying to convince yourself this is just a bedtime story. Your brain has already asked the forbidden question. If Santa the hangman came to my door, what bundle would he leave for me? Not a gift, not rope, but a bundle. Heavy, wrapped, waiting. Would you dare open it? Would you even touch it? Or would you, like the villagers, just leave it by the wall, praying the snow would swallow it before morning? The hangman turned at last, lantern swinging back toward the road. He didn't look at the girl. He didn't need to. She followed anyway, steps small, careful, as if the snow itself was listening. Behind them, the bundle lay half hidden, rope gleaming faintly in the light's retreat. The girl glanced back once, and in that glance she swore she saw the cloth move again. Not snow this time, movement, a twitch, a breath. But when she blinked, it was still. They walked until the road curved, until the manor's lights flickered in the distance like watchful eyes. The hangman stopped at the boundary stone again. He set the lantern down upon it, flame steady, unyielding. Then he faced her. At last. His eyes, barely visible under the hood, were not cruel. They weren't kind either. They were measuring, as if she were another bundle, another task to be weighed, bound and carried. He didn't speak, but she felt the words anyway. One day, the rope is yours. And with that, he lifted the lantern, turned, and vanished into the snow. The girl stood alone at the stone, wooden horse in her fist, ribbon in her sleeve, memory in her bones. Behind her, somewhere in the dark, the bundle waited. And tell me, if it were you standing there, would you go back to check if it still twitched? She didn't go back that night. She walked home with the ribbon itching her wrist and the horse sweating splinters into her palm. And she told herself the twitch she'd seen was only snow learning to breathe. When the door groaned open, the lantern on their table greeted her like a judgment she'd married. The mother glanced up. The father stiffened. The boy coughed his broom cough, and the rope on the table pretended to nap. The girl slid the ribbon into a crack in the bench and sat on it, as if she could hatch it into innocence. "Where?" the father asked without looking at her. That's how you ask dangerous questions. "Sideways." "Churchyard," she answered, and let the lie hang on the rafters with the smoke. The mother's eyes flicked to the lantern, then to the girl's cheeks, measuring frost. She said nothing. Mothers always know when a child has been speaking to the dark. They just pick a later time to punish the grammar. Sleep tried the house and failed. The wind took over, batting the shutters like a cat that liked its toys noisy. At some hour that didn't deserve a name, the lantern clicked again. The flame leaned west as if it remembered. The father set his jaw. The mother whispered to the empty chair. The boy pulled the blanket over his head and turned into a hill that trembling invented. The girl got up, crossed to the table, and did the most rebellious thing anyone could do under that glow. She held her hands over it, palms down, warming them as if the lantern belonged to her. The heat was shy but real. It climbed her fingers, paused at her wrists, and decided to trust her a little. She imagined the flame leaning not because of death, but because of her. Ridiculous. But children get to borrow ridiculous until the rent comes due. She closed her eyes and saw the bundle again, the rope crossing like a signature. If she'd been older, she would have called it complicity. Tonight, she called it Christmas. Morning yanked them awake by the hair. The door wore a new ornament, a smear of frozen mud at latch height, the kind of mark a glove leaves when it's too tired to be polite. On the step sat a small package wrapped in dull cloth and tied with twine, the hangman's version of a bow. The father stared at it the way men stare at thunderheads, waiting for the first insult. The mother made the sign of the cross twice, because once felt like optimism. The boy announced he was not hungry and then looked hungry exactly 3 seconds later. The girl took the package. It was light. That scared her more than weight would have. Heavy things tell the truth about themselves. Light things can be anything. She tugged the twine, slow, as if speed might be mistaken for disrespect. Inside lay a coil of thinner rope, and, nested in its loop like a bird that doesn't understand nests, a tiny bell. The bell was black with age where fingers had not rubbed it, and bright like a tooth where they had. She lifted it. It didn't ring. The clapper had been stuffed with a twist of wool. "What does it mean?" the mother asked, though the lantern, the rope, and the calendar all already knew. The father spoke first, because fathers believe sounds are shields. "It means quiet," he said. "It means we are to keep quiet." He pulled the wool from the bell and set it on the table beside the coil. The girl held the bell to her ear and shook it once. The silence it made was perfect, a circle with no exit. She stuffed the wool back fast, cheeks heating with guilt that tasted like curiosity. By noon, the square had learned about the steward for real. Men bunched into little herds that pretended to be conversations. The priest's voice cracked like pond ice as he announced an inquiry, which was a fancy way of saying people would be asked to repeat what they already feared. The hangman stood at the edge of the crowd, lantern dead in daylight, hood low enough to make everyone's teeth feel stupid. He didn't look at anyone. He never had to. You behave just fine if a door is closed and you know what's behind it. That afternoon, the girl slipped to the well and found the baker's ribbon there. Hers twin, red gone tired, tied around the post where gossip likes to lean. She untied it. Not theft, rescue. On her way home she passed the lich gate and touched the hinge. It didn't sing. Mercy can be engineered. She wondered if justice could be too. The bell in her pocket felt like a secret applauding itself. She wanted it to ring. Not because she loved noise, but because she wanted proof that something still worked as it was designed, that a thing could be itself without permission. At the threshold, she paused, peeled the wool and gave the bell the gentlest flick. It rang once, thin, a silver hair plucked from the air, and the lantern on the table answered with a single soft tilt. Left. The sound died. The flame straightened. The girl swallowed the wool as if silence were medicine you could chew. Night again. It always comes as if it invented itself. The mother wrapped the thinner coil of rope around the thicker one, a gesture you might mistake for tidying if you didn't understand fear's love language. The father set the bell on the mantel and turned it so the seam faced the wall. The boy counted his breaths like coins he planned to spend wisely. The lantern waited. That click didn't come, and the not coming felt like a decision. You're waiting too. You want the knock you can predict, not the kind of quiet that breeds shapes behind the eyes. You bargain. If I stay still, the story will only walk past me. I can't promise that. Stories have better map-reading skills than we do. Near midnight, the wind shut up. That silence, the one that makes even the stove listen, folded over the house and pressed down. The girl slid from her blanket and stood. The lantern's wick had burned shorter. Its flame wore a crown of blue like a saint demoted. She lifted the bell, felt the wool through the brass like a heartbeat with manners, and decided, no, not a ring, a walk. She opened the door, the cold bit with small, polite teeth. Snow took her ankles in both hands and tried to persuade her to be reasonable. She declined. The village lay like a confession someone had fallen asleep in the middle of writing. She crossed the square, a dark arrow in a white book, and followed the road toward the boundary stone because all questions end there first. Behind her, another door opened, then another, the kind of opening that happens when people dream at the same time. She didn't turn. The bell knocked against her wrist like a friend with bad timing. At the stone, she found footprints newer than her hope. The lantern's flame wasn't there, but the idea of it was. She stepped beyond the line adults swear isn't a line. The field breathed, long, shallow, as if pretending sleep. The bundle was gone. The girl stood in its absence and felt heavier than when it existed. Absence is greedy like that. She crouched and touched the place where rope had bit Snow. It remembered. Snow always does. Her horse leaned from her pocket and watched. She thought of the steward's face, the way the lantern leaned, the way the bell might ring if she gave it the chance. Bootsteps at last, behind her, measured, familiar. She didn't turn. Turning would admit she was part of the ritual. Facing forward let her pretend she was the story's inventor. The boots stopped an arm's length away. Breath ghosted her shoulder. The bell in her hand thrummed without ringing. She waited for a glove to reach past her, for a lantern to land beside her knee, for the flame to angle and an answer to be drawn in light. Nothing. Only the weight of someone being there so completely that it bent the night around him. "Is it mine?" she whispered, not trusting the air with the word rope. The breath behind her didn't change. The silence nodded. Or maybe the wind did. Or maybe you did, listening. Because you already know the rope always belongs to whoever has the courage to ask about it. The bell slipped from her fingers and fell into the snow without a sound. She didn't look down. She didn't move. The boots shifted. Half a step, no more. Closing the space in a way that conversation never could. The night leaned with them. The red ribbon in her sleeve woke and wanted to be seen. And then, without a lantern, and without a knock, the dark ahead of her opened like a mouth preparing to say her name. The dark didn't speak, not in words, but it exhaled, warm, wet, like the inside of an animal's lung. The girl froze. Behind her, the boots stayed still, patient as a rope coiled on a beam. In front of her, the night shifted again, the way a heavy sleeper rolls over without waking. She clutched the crooked horse until the wood nearly cracked in her hand. One step forward and she'd be swallowed. One step back and she'd collide with the hangman, with his silence, with his breath that turned the air to iron. It's strange, isn't it? How fear gives you choices that aren't choices at all. Forward or back, dark or rope. The middle never exists. That's the trick of survival. Convincing yourself you chose when really you just lost slower. She chose forward. The snow beneath her boots made no sound. It was as if the field wanted to keep her secret, or maybe it was just tired of testifying. The breath of the dark grew louder the closer she stepped, until her ears rang and her ribs ached with the pressure. She thought of the bell she'd dropped, buried in snow behind her. Would it ring on its own if she never picked it up? Would it call her name or his? Behind, the boots shifted once. The hangman wasn't following, but he wasn't leaving either. His presence was like the lantern's glow, constant, indifferent, impossible to escape. She kept walking. The crooked horse in her hand burned cold, like metal left in frost. She pressed its bent leg into her palm, pain reminding her she was still awake, and then she saw it. At the very edge of the lantern's memory, past where even the stars wanted to look, a shape, not the bundle, something taller, swaying. At first, she thought it was a tree, but no, too thin, too deliberate. A post, a beam, a gallows half buried in snow. She blinked, and the vision doubled as though her eyes wanted to believe there were 2, 3, a whole row of them. But the longer she stared, the more it resolved into one. Only one. The gallows had no rope on it. That was almost worse. It stood naked, waiting like a throat bared for a knife. She shuddered and turned, half expecting the hangman to be gone. But no, he was still there, dark against dark, hood low, body still, watching. Her lips cracked as she whispered, "Why show me this?" The gallows answered with creaks. Wood doesn't need language, it complains in its own. The beam groaned, frost shifting in its joints. And in that groan, she understood. This wasn't built for criminals. This was built for her. Not tonight maybe, not even next winter, but someday. The rope on her table, the lantern leaning left, the bell stuffed with wool, it all pointed here, to this post, to this waiting. The horse slipped from her grip and landed in the snow, crooked leg buried. She bent to pick it up, but the wind surged and suddenly the toy looked small, laughable, an offering too weak to matter. She left it. When she straightened, the gallows seemed closer, as though it had leaned toward her in gratitude. Behind her at last the boots moved, slow, steady, deliberate. The hangman was walking now, closing the distance between them, lanternless but luminous in his own way. She didn't flee. Running from inevitability is the most foolish thing of all. She stood, body trembling, eyes locked on the gallows, waiting for his shadow to overlap hers. It did, and in that overlap, she felt the weight of the rope, not on her neck, not yet, but everywhere else. On her shoulders, on her spine, on her breath. She closed her eyes and waited for the glove on her arm, the coil across her throat. But instead there was only silence, a silence so full it roared. When she opened her eyes, the gallows were gone. Only the field stretched out before her, blank and indifferent. The wind blew again, covering her footprints, erasing her visit, as if she hadn't seen anything at all, as if the night had changed its mind. She turned. The hangman stood a few paces away, hood low, lantern in one hand now. She hadn't seen him pick it up, but the flame was there, steady, leaning just enough to remind her it was alive. He lifted it higher, casting her shadow long across the snow. The shadow stretched until it touched his boots, like a rope thrown between them. She thought he would speak. He didn't. He only tilted the lantern just slightly until the flame leaned left again, and then he walked away, past her, past the boundary stone, down the road that led back to the village, as though she had been nothing more than another mark in his calendar. The girl stood alone in the field, horse abandoned, ribbon hidden, bell buried. Her hands shook, her teeth chattered, but her eyes, they stayed wide open because once you've seen your own gallows in the dark, sleep doesn't visit as often. And you're not sleeping either, are you? You thought you came here for a bedtime story, something boring to drift off to. But now you're wide awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if the shadow stretching across your wall belongs to you or to something waiting for you. Because here's the truth the villagers always knew. The hangman didn't bring gifts, he brought reminders. And the worst reminder of all was this: your story has only one ending. The only question is how long the rope decides to wait. To stretch, but really it braced. Frost stitched the roofs with tiny teeth. Smoke rose from chimneys, as if each house had decided to practice disappearing. People talked the way you walk on ice, careful, single syllable, one thought at a time. No one mentioned the field, the knot gallows, the steward face down in ceremonial snow. They mentioned bread, boots, weather, saints. Saints are useful. You can blame them for anything and they never file complaints. Your bed at home is warm, but your head isn't. You keep replaying the image of her shadow touching his boots, a line thrown between two lives like a dare. You tell yourself it's just a story. Then you check your own hallway anyway. The brain's favorite hobby is proving the mouth a liar. The priest announced a fast for clarity. Translation: starve the body so fear has room to grow tall. He swung incense that smelled like a forest, pretending it could afford perfume. In his sermon, he insisted the steward had succumbed to winter's judgment, which is a poetic way of saying, please stop asking questions while the Lord is listening. The Lord's men stood at the back with fists that looked eager to be nouns. The hangman stood where he always stood, near the door, half-turned, available to leave because leaving is his profession. He didn't look at the girl, he didn't have to. She felt looked at anyway. At market, the baker's wife tied new ribbons and then untied them in a panic when the wind pointed west. The miller claimed his scales had become honest overnight. Everyone pretended to be surprised. A traveling peddler sold tin stars, insisting they protected chimneys from spirits. Someone asked which spirits. He said, whichever ones you're afraid of, and sold out before noon. Fear is the best currency. It spends itself. The girl kept the bell's wool in her cheek like contraband courage. The ribbon hid in her sleeve. The crooked horse lay somewhere under a white sheet of field, dreaming of standing straight, She walked the square with the posture of someone who has learned the trick of appearing smaller without shrinking. People let her pass. Children show us our own temperature, and no one wanted to touch the thermometer today. At home, the lantern continued its legal career. It didn't click, it didn't lean. It simply existed with the authority of furniture that knows it will outlive you. The rope on the table had learned the family's rituals so well, it seemed to breathe between prayers. The father pretended to mend a boot. The needle went nowhere. The mother pretended to sort beans. Every bean judged her. The boy pretended not to cough. The cough enjoyed being contrary. Then came the knock. That wasn't the knock. 3 taps, lighter, quicker, human in the humble way. The father opened the door and found the parish beadle, hat like a tired cake, nose red with the flavor of duty. He requested the girl's presence to answer small matters, which is the bureaucratic cousin of, "Come see the rope we prepared earlier." The mother started to argue, but the lantern's flame gave a bored twitch, and that ended the discussion. They took her to the priest's side room, the one lined with books that wore dust like dignity. The Lord Steward used to sit in the chair by the window and complain about tithe numbers. Now the chair held its own ghost. The priest smiled kindness that had been boiled down to a concentrate. The beadle rattled a list. The hangman stood by the hearth, as if his shadow belonged to the fire. No lantern here. Sunlight did the interrogation today. Questions came like a drizzle, annoying, relentless. "Where were you? Which way did you walk? Did you see anyone? Did you hear bells? Bells, yes, bells." The priest explained, lips thin. A bell had been found by the boundary stone, stuffed with wool. Curious, almost as if someone were practicing silence. The beadle lifted a pouch, poured the bell into his palm. The girl's stomach dropped, an elevator discovering basements. She kept her eyes on the priest's collar, so she wouldn't look at the hangman's hands. "Is it yours?" the priest asked softly, which is how you carry a knife in velvet. She thought, if I say no, the wool in my cheek goes on trial. If I say yes, my throat does. She swallowed carefully. "It is a bell. Not wrong, not right, just present." The beadle sighed, disappointed that ambiguity can't be taxed. The priest leaned forward. "Child, our world turns on truth." The girl wanted to ask whether the rope counted as a truth or a tool. She remained silent. Silence, after all, had a sponsor. The hangman finally moved, only his head, tilt tiny, like a hinge that had been oiled by weather. He looked at the bell, then at her sleeve, as if he could see the ribbon sleeping there. He didn't speak. Instead, he reached for the poker and stirred the coals. Sparks rose like regretted letters. Somewhere outside, a cartwheel negotiated a rut badly. The world kept its casual strut. Enough, the priest decided, which meant the questions had failed to arrange themselves into a comfortable picture. Go home. Pray. The Lord sees. Everyone heard the capital L. The girl stood, nodded at the floor, and left with a back so straight it was practically a sermon. The beadle followed her to the door, suddenly gentle, suddenly human, the way even stones soften in snowfall. "Mind the frost," he said. "Advice or warning, take your pick." Outside, the square had arranged itself for afternoon. The peddler's tin stars clinked like nervous songs. The baker's new batch smelled like hope practicing a speech. A dog chased nothing and caught it gloriously. The girl slipped between the day's noises, learning how to not make any. As she passed the well, the hangman's shadow crossed her path first. He arrived a heartbeat later, as if his darkness liked to scout ahead. She stopped, because stopping felt like the only honest motion left. "You dropped something," he said, voice like gravel deciding to be a road, the first words he had ever given her. He held out his hand. In his palm lay not the bell, not the horse, but a small iron nail, black and simple, the sort used to fasten beams that insist on disagreeing. One end was bent, as if persuaded by a patient hammer. She took it. It weighed almost nothing, and yet reported its presence to every nerve she owned. A nail is a promise the future makes behind your back. She closed her fingers and nodded. He nodded back, the hood moving like a curtain with a shy actor behind it. Then he continued across the square toward the road that led to everyone's thresholds. The sack rode his shoulder like a tired moon. You think the nail is better than rope. It isn't. It's just earlier in the story. At home, she set the nail on the table beside the rope and the lantern, and for one shimmering second, The three objects looked like parts of a single sentence. The mother covered them with a cloth the color of forgiveness. The father said grace in a voice that knew it was lying and tried to sound grateful about it. The boy finally fell asleep, mouth open, dreaming of bread that would not betray him. Dusk came in on soft feet, and with it the knowledge that the hangman was once again knocking, walking, leaving, reminding. The girl touched the nail and imagined it pinning the world to the page so it couldn't turn to the next, worse chapter. But pages turn. They always do. The wind rehearsed a new rhythm. The lantern's wick shortened by a breath, and far down the road, 3 dull thuds found another door that wasn't ready but opened anyway. You tell yourself you'll sleep after this next breath. You won't. Because the last thing she saw before the night closed its mouth was the nail's bent head catching the lantern light, shaped like a tiny, crooked smile. And you know exactly what that means. It means the wood is ready to receive it, and someone is ready to drive it home. Nails, ropes, lanterns, each object in the house now felt like part of a set. Props waiting for a play no one wanted to attend, but everyone knew was scheduled. The girl couldn't look at the nail without imagining it pressed against wood, driven by a hammer that wasn't hers. She rolled it between her fingers at night, listening to the tiny scrape of iron against skin, a sound that whispered, "Someday you'll hold more than toys." Her mother avoided the table now, setting bowls on the floor instead. "The light's better down here," she claimed, though the lantern burned no less on the floorboards than on the table. Her father grew quieter, his voice drying into monosyllables. The boy coughed less, not because he healed, but because silence seemed contagious. Even sickness learned to whisper, and outside the rhythm of boots never changed. Step, pause, step. Snow crunching like parchment torn in half. The hangman's rounds became the clock no one admitted they followed. Candles burned down with his stride. Sleep arrived only in the spaces between his thuds. Christmas stretched into weeks because fear doesn't keep a calendar, it keeps accounts. The girl began carrying the nail in her pocket alongside the ribbon. 2 opposites, one sharp, one soft. She liked the way they pressed against each other, as if testing who would win. Some nights when the lantern's flame leaned without reason, she imagined fastening the ribbon to the table with the nail, pinning beauty down before the dark could erase it. Other nights she pictured driving the nail into the lantern itself, silencing its light forever. But she never did either. She only imagined, because imagination is rebellion's rehearsal. One afternoon, she visited the churchyard again. The hinge she'd seen him mend still swung smooth, too smooth, as if ashamed of the noises it used to make. She pushed it back and forth, listening for complaint, but none came. Her crooked horse would have laughed at that had she still carried it. Instead, she had the nail, and nails don't laugh. They wait. The priest saw her and beckoned. He offered bread, dry but edible, then lowered his voice. "Do you know why we fast, child?" She shook her head, though she knew his answer would be a sermon disguised as wisdom. "To empty ourselves," he said, "so the Lord may fill us." She chewed, swallowing crumbs that scratched like gravel. She wanted to ask, "And when the hangman fills us instead?" But children don't voice the questions adults refuse to invent answers for. On her way home, she noticed something peculiar. The square was quieter than usual, yes, but not in the usual way. This quiet had layers, a silence that folded over itself. She realized why when she saw the peddler's cart. Empty. Tin stars gone, wooden charms vanished. Even the old scraps he used for padding stripped bare. The man himself was nowhere. People muttered he'd left at dawn. Others swore they saw him speaking to the hangman before disappearing. Either way, he was gone, and his absence was louder than his hawking had ever been. That night, the knock came later than usual. The father had just closed his eyes when it rattled the door like a fist that knew it was expected. He opened it, slower than usual. The hangman entered, sack slung low, lantern steady. The girl counted his breaths. They came heavier, as if carrying the sack had cost him more tonight. He set it on the floor. It didn't slump, it didn't coil. It landed upright, rigid, as if something inside refused to bend. He opened it. One by one he pulled objects out. A pair of children's shoes scuffed, one lace broken. He set them by the boy. A tin star, bent at the edge, glinting like gilt. He placed it before the mother. A loaf of bread, stale enough to double as wood. He offered it to the father, and for the girl, nothing. The sack hung open, mouth wide, empty. She waited, ribbon in sleeve, nail in pocket, pulse hammering louder than any tool. His gloved hand hovered over the empty space, then withdrew. He looked at her. No toy, no rope. Just that look, heavy as an anvil, sharp as frost. Her chest burned. She wanted to ask, why nothing? But silence was the price of survival, and her family's rope already occupied the table. She lowered her eyes. The hangman turned, lifted his lantern, and left. The flame leaned not left, not right. Straight up, tall and thin, a line pointing nowhere. The door closed. The boots retreated. The girl exhaled. Only then did she realize she had dug her nails into her pocket so deep that the iron nail inside had left its mark. A small, perfect crescent in her skin. You think nothing is mercy. It isn't. Nothing is worse. Nothing means wait. Nothing means the rope hasn't decided. The gallows hasn't chosen its shape. The bundle hasn't been tied yet, but it will. Nothing is the gift you can never unwrap, because it unwraps you instead. She sat at the table, staring at the empty sack mouth still vivid in her mind. Her ribbon itched, her nail weighed, her silence screamed, and outside snow kept falling, pretending it could bury what it never truly hides. Nothing is a clever gift. It arrives wrapped in air, weighs exactly as much as your dread, and you can't return it because the receipt is written on your nerves. After the hangman left you with it, left her with it, you could feel the house remeasure itself. Walls leaned in. The table grew a spine, the lantern found a new posture. Even the rope on the table seemed satisfied, like a cat pretending it didn't just knock something fragile off a shelf. You know that feeling. You stare at your door, swear you're fine, then realize your shoulders have been trying to become your ears for the last 5 minutes. Go on, roll them back, breathe. And hey, since we're measuring nothings, measure this. Hit subscribe like you're closing a latch against a polite storm, and check the pinned comment for the Christmas calendar, the only countdown where day 24 doesn't mean trapdoor. Little luxuries before the lantern leans again. The girl slept badly, which is a polite way to say she didn't. When morning came, it didn't arrive. It negotiated. Grey light seeped through the shutter like gossip. The boy's cough resumed its broom career. The mother sorted beans that multiplied when backs were turned. The father stared at the bread the hangman had left, stale, cracking, then ate it anyway, because hunger never believes in metaphors. The tin star the mother received lay on the mantel. Every time the lantern flickered, the star flashed back like a bad idea. The scuffed shoes waited by the fire to grow a child brave enough to wear them. And the girl, she kept her hands in her pockets like jailers. The nail pressed one palm, the ribbon teased the other. Nothing, she told herself. He gave me nothing. But nothing is a shape. It has corners. It rubs. It calls itself later and means soon. In the square, the priest announced a vigil for the steward. Candles in a line, prayers in a row, grief made tidy so the Lord wouldn't trip on it. The hangman didn't attend the part where people stared at wax. He attended the part where people watched him not attend. He stood at the far end of the well, watching water pretend not to be frozen. When the girl passed, his shadow touched her toes before his boots did. She pretended not to notice. The trick to surviving attention is to make it spend itself. The beadle muttered that the inquiry had new directions, which meant the wind had picked a different face to slap. Rumor suggested the peddler's cart hadn't left. It had been moved. Ribbons, bells, tin stars. All the pretty lies had changed pockets. People began checking one another's mantles like they were searching for disease. Festive, right? Merry Christmas. May your neighbor not accuse you before you accuse them. At dusk, the lantern clicked. The sound was so small it felt huge. The flame leaned right, finally a new opinion, and the girl's stomach fell the way a bucket falls when rope slips wet in the hand. The father swore without moving his lips. The mother folded her apron into smaller and smaller squares until it looked like a wound bandaged badly. The boy asked what right meant. No one answered. Answers are expensive when the market is fear. The knock came sooner than their knees were ready. 3 thuds that sounded like the same one repeated by a building that loved echoes. The father opened. The hangman entered. No sack tonight. Only the lantern and a short stick of chalk in his glove, white as the truth everyone avoids. He crossed to the hearth, crouched, and began to draw on the stone in strokes so deliberate the air felt accused. A circle, a line, Another line. Not a symbol the priest taught. Not a letter the Lord's steward would count. Something older. Something that meant here to the kind of history that doesn't bother with books. The chalk bit. The stone drank. The flame watched. The family clustered at the edges of their own house, as if the corners had promised asylum. When he finished, the hangman stood, chalk dust on his glove like frost. He faced the girl. You know that feeling when a cliff looks at you. That. He held out the chalk. She didn't take it. He didn't insist. He only tilted his head and looked at the nail bulge in her pocket, the way a carpenter looks at a knot in wood, calculating, patient, maybe even fond. Then he tapped the symbol he'd drawn with 2 fingers. The sound was small, like a secret clearing its throat. He left. No rope, no sack, no words. Just a symbol on stone and a silence that grew muscles. When the door closed, the mother hissed prayers so quickly they turned into steam. The father stepped toward the hearth, stopped, stepped back. The boy crouched and traced the chalk with his finger, then yelped as if the lines had teeth. Hot, he swore. The girl knelt. It wasn't hot, it was aware. That's worse. Night took its seat. The lantern burned like it had tenure. The symbol near the fire did not fade. When the flame leaned right, the chalk brightened. When it centered, the chalk paled. A conversation between Light and Mark, conducted in a language the room pretended not to understand. The girl pressed her palm flat against the stone just beside the lines. The heat there felt like an animal asleep. She dreamed badly again, this time of nails walking on tiptoe across beams, polite as thieves, of ropes knitting themselves into letters she could almost read, of lanterns blinking like eyes that refused to close, because closing would be rude while you existed. She woke with her throat dry and the taste of chalk under her tongue, though she hadn't licked anything except fear. Morning brought a visitor no one expected. The baker's wife, hair a riot of pins, cheeks raw from gossip's wind. She carried a bag that clinked. On the table she spilled tin stars, dozens, bent and bright, each one a lie that failed to stay sold. He left them on my step, she said, all of them, like a debt paid back. The father eyed the symbol by the hearth. The mother touched the rope as if it might translate. The girl picked up a star. It caught the lantern and threw it into her eye hard enough to make a tear. She pretended the tear belonged to the star. The baker's wife left in a hurry, deciding she didn't like the way the symbol watched. People came and went all day, practicing returning what wasn't theirs. A bell here, a ribbon there, a pair of gloves, a scrap of lace, a knife. Oh, that one made the room lean. Somewhere beyond the square, the beadle found the peddler's cart in a ditch, wheels up, inventory 0, and declared the case complicated, which is bureaucratic, for we have no rope long enough. At sundown, the symbol brightened by itself. No click, no lean. It simply gathered the day's leftover light and fed. The girl understood then that nothing had been a reservation, a table held in her name. Whatever the hangman had failed to place in her hands last night, he had placed under her house instead. She took the nail from her pocket, held it over the chalk lines. The lantern's flame narrowed, jealous. She pressed the iron point to the center of the symbol. It fit, horribly, as if the world had been waiting for this exact weight. The stone hummed. Not a sound, a pressure. The rope on the table twitched like a snake having a thought. The boy woke with a gasp he wasn't sure belonged to him. The mother whispered the kind of prayer that's really a threat to God. The father moved without knowing where to. The nail sank a hair. The chalk flared. The lantern leaned right so hard it kissed glass. Somewhere outside, Boots stopped, not approaching, waiting. The whole village seemed to hold its exhale, and you, yes you, listening in the dark, did the same, because even far away you can feel when a room decides to become a cliff. The girl lifted the nail, considered the ribbon, considered the empty gift, the gallows that was and wasn't, the horse in the snow learning to be part of it. She placed the ribbon over the chalk, tied it once, red loop on stone, and pushed the nail through, slowly, carefully, like pinning a heartbeat to a map. The symbol brightened to a black you could see. The floor shivered. The door knocked. Not 3 thuds. 1, as if the rope had learned a new word, and it was her name. 1 knock. That's all it took to erase centuries of routine. 3 thuds had always been the rule, the metronome of dread everyone rehearsed for. But this single, sharp, solitary sound cut deeper than a gallows rope. It wasn't an announcement. It was a claim. I don't have to follow the pattern anymore. The pattern follows me. The father froze mid-breath. The mother's hands, halfway through braiding her apron ties, simply stayed there, fingers trembling in a knot that looked like it wanted to strangle itself. The boy curled tighter under his blanket, though his cough betrayed him like a traitor in a courtroom. And the girl, she sat perfectly still, hand on the nail, ribbon pinned to the chalk, as if she had been the one to summon the sound. Maybe she had. The lantern flickered, not out of weakness, but out of decision. The flame leaned hard right, then straightened, then right again, as if bowing. The rope on the table twitched once more, coils shifting like an animal dreaming. Another knock. Just one. Louder. The father rose. He moved like a puppet who suddenly understood strings. His knees didn't bend right, his arms hung wooden, but his hand still found the latch. The girl wanted to scream, "Don't," but silence had already signed its contract. The door opened, and there he was. The hangman didn't enter this time. He stood in the threshold, lantern in one hand, sack in the other. The flame inside the glass burned tall and thin, a candle that refused to bend. Snow gusted past him into the house, stinging cheeks and eyes. His hood hid his face, but not his presence. That was always brighter than fire. He lifted the sack, slowly, deliberately. Then he set it on the floorboards, just inside the door, without stepping over himself. A gift? A burden? A verdict? All three. The girl stared at it, upright again like the night before, but heavier somehow. The mouth was tied with rope, knotted so neatly it looked ceremonial. Her pulse hammered in her throat. She knew, with the kind of knowing that doesn't need proof, that this sack was not for her father, nor her mother, nor her brother. It was for her. The hangman didn't say a word. He didn't need to. He only tilted the lantern so the flame leaned right again. Then he turned and walked away, boots sinking into snow that swallowed every sound after the third step. The father shut the door, bolted it twice. The mother collapsed against the wall, apron ties falling undone. The boy whispered, "Don't open it." His voice cracked, broke, mended itself as a whisper again, "Don't." But the girl already knew she would, because nothing had been the worst gift, and now something waited, and something is always louder than nothing. She dragged the sack toward the hearth. It left a trail in the dust like a slug of dread. The rope knot gleamed. She pressed the nail against it, not to untie, but to test. The iron point sank a little, almost willingly, the rope loosened by a hair. She glanced at the chalk symbol, still pinned by the ribbon, and thought, "If I open this, I cross a line no door can keep shut." Her mother hissed, "Stop." Her father barked, "Leave it." The boy started crying, muffled in his blanket. But the lantern flickered brighter, and the flame leaned again, and the chalk on the floor pulsed faintly in answer. The room itself wanted her to open it. Her hands trembled as she pulled the knot free. The sack slumped. Something inside shifted, heavy, shapeless, bound. She reached in. The cloth rasped against her skin, cold and damp. She pulled, and when the object came free, she nearly dropped it back. A mask. Wooden, crude, carved with two hollow eyes and a slit mouth. The kind of mask you'd put on a man you didn't want to see but needed to fear. The kind executioners wore when hoods weren't enough. Its surface was scratched, dented, burned in places. But the worst part wasn't what it looked like. The worst part was how warm it felt in her hands, as though someone had worn it only moments ago. She stared. Her breath came fast. Her mother crossed herself so many times she nearly carved the sign into her chest. Her father muttered a curse that melted halfway. The boy peeked out from his blanket, then buried his face again. The girl held the mask higher. The lantern leaned toward it, flame bowing like a servant. The chalk lines by the hearth glowed faintly, pulsing in rhythm with her heartbeat. The rope twitched. Everything in the room, every object, answered the mask's arrival. And you, lying there in your bed, suddenly imagine it too. The weight of wood against your face, the smell of sweat trapped in grain, the hollow echo of your own breath inside a space that doesn't belong to you. Tell me, would you dare put it on? Or would you drop it, run, pretend you never touched it? The girl didn't drop it. She didn't run. She pressed it to her face, and the house went silent. At first, the mask was only wood and dark. Then it became a room. Her breath hit the inside and came back warmer, tasting like old smoke and a stranger's mouth. The eye holes narrowed the world into two tunnels. She felt taller and smaller at once, like standing on a stool in a cellar. Sound changed too. The house receded. The lantern's hiss got closer. Her heartbeat crawled between wood grain. She expected panic. Instead, she felt, awful word, permission. As if the mask had been waiting for her face like a scabbard waits for a blade. "Take it off," her mother whispered, terrified of both options. "Take it off now." The father didn't move. He was listening to the shape of silence, the way a hunter listens to water to guess if it's safe to drink. The boy said nothing. He'd gone somewhere behind his eyes where coughs don't belong. The girl looked at the room through the narrow field the mask allowed. The chalk symbol by the hearth glowed a pulse she could count to. The ribbon pinned beneath the nail was red enough to argue with night. The rope on the table had stopped pretending to be asleep. It watched her the way a cat learns your schedule. The lantern's flame leaned right in a bow that felt like a dare. She took one step. The mask turned the step into ceremony. 2 steps, and the floorboards answered with a groan that sounded like winter clearing its throat. She faced the door where the sack had been. She imagined the hangman still on the threshold, lantern held high, hood lowered, pleased in the way a craftsman is pleased when a tool finds its hand. She hated that thought and treasured it, the way you hate and treasure the cliff you keep not jumping from. "Please," the mother breathed. "Let me see you." The girl lifted the mask an inch, enough to show a mouth that did not feel like hers anymore. Then she lowered it again. The mask felt heavier if she thought about it, lighter if she didn't. It taught her quickly not to think. You try it too, don't you? You imagine wood sealing your vision into obedience, your breath trapped, your name exchanged for function. For a moment it's easier, because being a person is hard and being a role is simple. That's how masks win. They offer you a smaller cage that looks like freedom. The girl turned toward the hearth. The chalk symbol brightened as if it recognized her. She knelt. The mask made her neck into a hinge with opinions. She pressed her gloved. When did she put on gloves? She hadn't. But her hands felt gloved anyway. She pressed them to the stone. Heat seeped through, careful, measuring. The nail in the ribbon quivered. With the mask on, every object had a voice. The nail spoke in iron monosyllables, the ribbon sang like a vein, the rope hummed a tune that had no mercy for choruses. "What do you see?" the father asked, authority pretending it still mattered. "Less," she said, surprised the word fit through the slit. "And more." The lantern flickered. The flame straightened. The symbol dimmed to the color of thinking. The girl stood. The mask fit better than it had a minute ago. It had learned her face the way water learns a cup. That frightened her in a clean, bright way. She breathed shallow to keep from fogging what wasn't glass. Another knock. 1. The house exhaled in unison. The father reached for the latch. The mother caught his wrist. "No," she said, voice ironed flat. "Her." The girl crossed the room with steps that belonged to a different body. The door opened inward, as if to avoid defying her. Snow peered in, curious as a child barred from the grown-up's table. No one stood there. The doorstep was empty except for the triple tracks of boots that began where light ended. The night breathed its animal breath again. Somewhere, a bell rang once and stopped, ashamed of its courage. She stepped outside. The cold slid under the mask and tasted her nose. The lantern on the table leaned right, then left, undecided but invested. The chalk behind her brightened as if to mark her absence. The rope did not move. Ropes don't need to chase. They wait. The village lay under a thin snowfall that tried to erase itself as it fell. Her sight tunneled the square into a corridor. Doors were closed, shutters latched, chimneys worried at the sky. The well remembered every secret that had been told into it and kept its mouth shut. She followed the boot tracks because roads are decisions. Past the baker's awning that held a lace of frost, past the peddler's ditch where the cart had learned the posture of surrender, past the church, whose bell refused to explain itself. The tracks curved toward the boundary stone, as all stories did. The mask stole her peripheral vision, so she turned her head like an owl to study the edges. Fences, shrubs, the hill where children used to sled before games turned into inventory. At the stone, she stopped. The tracks did too. They didn't turn or scatter. They ended, 3 clean ovals pressed into powder as if boots had learned levitation. Beyond them, nothing. That was worse than a direction. She listened. No lantern hiss, no rope whisper, only wind rehearsing an apology. She looked up through the tunnels. The sky was a low ceiling of pewter. Then the mask did something she didn't tell it to do. It tilted. The left tunnel lowered, the right lifted. Her spine obeyed before her mind did. The world slid, and her gaze found the alder trees. In their shadow, a shape like a man not occupying his own outline. She didn't breathe. Shapes double as answers. "Come," said a voice that was not spoken. The mask had learned it for her. Her feet obeyed. The snow here was deeper, resentful of her ankles. The shape clarified into the hangman, hooded, lantern unlit, sack resting like a sleepy animal by his boot. Without light, he looked less like a man and more like a rule. She stopped an arm's length away. The mask magnified his stillness until it filled both tunnels. They stood like chess pieces that didn't believe in boards. He lifted a hand, palm out. Not halt, witness. In his other hand, chalk. He crouched and drew on the snow. The same circle, the same lines, the same old grammar that predates priests and lords. He finished, then pointed to the center as if indicating a chair. Sit. She didn't sit. She knelt. The snow confessed through her dress. The cold climbed with a bureaucrat's patience. He set the unlit lantern at the edge of the mark. The night bent around it, curious. He tapped the glass once. The flame was not there, and yet the glass fogged as if breath had claimed it. He stood, turned his hood toward her, and waited for the thing neither would name. "What happens if I take it off?" she asked through wood. He said nothing. The answer lived in his stillness. "You'll be yourself again, and that will be harder. What happens if I keep it?" Again silence, but warmer. "Then you'll be me, and that will be easier, and that is why it is wrong." The mask did not like those answers. It tightened, a rind around her skull. She pressed her palms to its cheeks and felt ridges where other hands had learned to do the same. How many faces had it measured? How many names had it eaten into duties? He reached, not for her, for the sack. He opened it. Inside, the wooden horse. Snow-stained, legs still crooked, shadow still brave. He set it beside the circle. It leaned and did not fall. Next, he drew from the sack a coil of the thin rope the bell had slept in. He placed that by the lantern's dead eye. Last, he brought out a strip of red cloth that matched the ribbon pinned in her house. Its end burnt black, where a candle, or a worse flame, had tried to teach it manners. He held the strip to the tunnels of her eyes. She saw the world through red. It made everything truthful. He let the cloth fall. He pointed at the mask. Not hard, not soft. Then at her chest. Then he turned the chalk and pressed it to his own hood, drawing a clumsy circle where a face would be if he had one. The snow received the flakes of white and pretended it could understand. He held the chalk out. She did not take it. She reached instead for the lantern, cold glass under glove that wasn't. She lifted it, shook it once the way a mother wakes a stubborn child. No fire, only a small clicking sound like a memory learning to walk. She set it down, heart-hammering syllables the mask refused to translate. From the village, a bell, real, high, brittle, rang thrice. The priest had found his courage or his fear. Both make the same noise. The hangman turned his hood in that direction. She knew he would go. Duty moves even when stories beg. Before he did, he tapped the circle again and held out the chalk a second time. "Take." She took it. It felt like a nail that had learned to write. He stepped back, and the space between them agreed to stay empty. Then he walked toward the bell, sack on shoulder, lantern unlit, boots writing their exact poem. The girl knelt alone with the circle, the horse, the rope, the strip of red, and the chalk in her hand. The mask breathed with her, or made her believe it did. She leaned forward and drew a little horse leg inside the circle, straighter than the real one. Then beside it she drew a line that could be a gallows or a gate. The chalk didn't judge. Snow never does. When she finished, the lantern fog cleared. Inside the glass, a point of orange woke like an eye remembering it had a job. It leaned right. The circle brightened. The rope on the ground made a small sound you only hear if you've learned not to blink. Behind her, the boundary stone clicked, stone on stone, a key in a lock no one had asked to be built. She stood, mask heavy, chalk warm, night open. The village waited with its bell and its rules. The field waited with its old grammar. Her house waited with a nail pinning a ribbon to meaning. She chose a direction the tunnels allowed and began to walk, each step an audition for a future that would either hang her or hand her a lantern. The mask didn't just narrow her vision, it narrowed her thoughts. Each tunnel framed the world like a corridor where choices walked in single file. Left, right, forward, Never both, never all. That's the cruelty of masks. They simplify. And sometimes simplicity feels like relief. The bell from the church tolled again, slower now as if ashamed of its own bravery. The girl followed the tunnels until the square swam into view. Villagers clustered with candles that tried to outshine their breath. The priest raised a book he hadn't read past the second page. The Lord's men lingered with hands on hilts, pretending that discipline is just another word for prayer. At the edge of it all, inevitable as frost, the hangman. Hood bowed, lantern at his side, flame steady but refusing to lean. The villagers saw her too. A child with wood strapped to her face, chalk clenched like a relic, snow sticking to her boots like guilt. Murmurs spread faster than fire, possessed, chosen, cursed air. Words cheap enough to buy terror. The mother clutched the boy to her chest, eyes begging the father to say something useful. He didn't. Fathers rarely do when the script is new. The priest extended a hand. "Child, take off the mask. Come into the light." His voice cracked on light as if the word cost extra. She didn't move. The mask made stillness feel like obedience, and obedience was safer than choice. Then the hangman stepped forward. Only one pace, but the snow winced under it. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. His lantern leaned right, and the flame finally bowed. The priest faltered. The villagers looked between the two of them, the hooded man of rope and the masked child with chalk, and realized they were witnessing a handoff no one had asked to attend. The girl lifted the chalk. She bent, pressed it to the frozen square stones. A circle, a line, another line, the same mark that haunted her hearth. She did it slow, deliberate, as though the stones might refuse if rushed. When she finished, the flame in the hangman's lantern flared, and the villagers stumbled back like dominoes pretending they weren't connected. The priest shouted something about demons. The Lord's men drew steel, but no one moved closer. Fear has longer arms than swords. The girl stood inside her chalk circle and breathed. Through the mask, every inhale sounded like the beginning of a sentence she wasn't sure she wanted to finish. The hangman lowered his hood slightly, not enough to reveal, only enough to acknowledge. He lifted the lantern and tilted it toward her. A silent offering, a question that wasn't a question. Would she carry it? Would she continue the ritual? Would she be the boots, the rope, the knock? Her hands trembled. The chalk clattered against stone. She reached forward, slow, slow, until her fingers brushed the cold glass. The flame bent toward her touch, as if recognizing kin. She lifted it, and the lantern felt lighter than it should have, as though weight had agreed to transfer from iron to bone. The villagers gasped. The priest dropped his book. The Lord's men stepped back, which is always more honest than stepping forward. The hangman straightened, sack slung, hands empty now. Empty was worse than full. Empty meant he no longer needed tools because the mask had chosen a new carpenter. The girl stood in the circle, lantern in one hand, chalk in the other. The mask pressed closer to her skin, sealing itself as if to remind her, roles don't get returned, they get inherited. She tried to speak, but her voice came out in wood-grain tones, hollow, muffled, alien. I see. What she saw. Every door in the square, trembling in anticipation of the knock. Every window shutter, shivering like a guilty eyelid. Every villager's breath, fogging the air in the shape of ropes waiting to be tied. The world was one long scaffold, and she was suddenly tall enough to notice. The hangman turned. He walked away, sack on shoulder, boots writing their steady poem. No one stopped him. They all stared at her instead. The child with the mask, the lantern, the chalk, the circle under her boots, the air, and you. You're staring too, aren't you? Wide awake now, pulse heavier, wondering if this is the moment where the story folds over itself. Because if Santa Claus was a hangman, then who comes next? Who knocks when the rope is busy? Who decides which houses deserve bundles, bells, or nothing at all? The girl didn't know either. She only knew that the flame leaned right again, and the circle at her feet glowed like a mouth preparing to name her. And in that naming she understood. Nothing had been the most generous gift of all, because nothing leaves room for you to become everything. The square didn't exhale. It held its breath and waited to see if you, yes you, the one with wood for a face and fire for a pulse, would inhale for everyone else. The lantern's handle pressed a thin ache into your fingers, a delicate little crown of pain, and the mask funneled the world into two obedient tunnels that made even the stars line up like suspects. Somebody dropped a candle, Hot wax kissed stone with a hiss that sounded exactly like don't. You didn't move. Sometimes stillness is the only way to keep the ground from choosing a side. The priest tried again, voice buttered with duty. Child, surrender the... The word lantern fell out of his mouth and shattered at his feet. He had no replacement. The Lord's men stared at their reflections trembling inside their blades, then pretended the shaking belonged to the cold. The baker's wife gripped her ribbons as if color could be armor. The boy with the broom cough peeked from your mother's shawl, eyes wide and wet, cough held hostage by wonder. And your father, jawstone, knuckles bone, watched you like a man politely drowning. Easy, you told the gathered air, though your voice came out carved and hollow. Your breath warmed the mask and the warmth came back like a promise signed by somebody else. The lantern's flame leaned right, then corrected as if embarrassed by enthusiasm. Funny thing, fear. It blushes too. Before the silence learned a worse trick, you did the only sane, ridiculous thing possible. You lifted the lantern to eye level and ran it slowly across the faces in front of you, like a teacher counting heads after the school burned down. People shrank. Light behaves like a question, and not everyone likes pop quizzes. Subscribe, you almost said, because sarcasm is the only spice left when terror eats the pantry. Instead, you breathed and let the lantern answer for you, the way a bell answers for a church. Still, if you're listening from bed, thumbs idling above your screen, go on and tap that button like you're fastening a winter latch. Then check the pinned comment for the Christmas calendar, the one that counts down without pretending the last square is anything but a door. Tiny rebellions. We hoard them. You stepped out of the chalk circle. It didn't fight you, which hurt more than it should have. Behind you the white mark glowed a little, then dulled, like an eye pretending not to follow. The hangman had gone, not vanished, simply removed himself with the tidy politeness of a sentence that no longer needs its comma. The square's eyes moved with you, an orbit you didn't ask to own. Your boots carved the snow into neat arguments. Past the well, past the peddler's empty shadow, past the priest who blessed your shoulder and not your soul. You walked the road that glides between houses, the way a knife glides between ribs. Door 1, a widow with hands like twine. Her candle guttered when your lantern's glow arrived. You knocked. 3 taps, measured, merciful. The door opened to fear arranged as hospitality. You held the light just inside, letting it taste the table. Rope on the shelf, bell on the lintel. A child's wooden spoon gnawed down like a moon in its last quarter. Your throat tried to invent words. The mask preferred function. You set a taper on the table, stub of a stub, nodded once, left. Not gifts, bearings. The widow cried anyway, the good and terrible way people cry when somebody acknowledges they exist. Door 2, the miller. Scales cleaned until they could lie more convincingly. His eyes slid off the mask, bounced against the lantern, landed on the floor like guilty seeds. You chalked a small circle in ash beside his hearth and pressed your palm in the center. When you lifted it, the print glowed. He started to protest, then folded himself into obedience so fast you almost heard his bones applaud. You didn't threaten him. You made the room remember its rules. That, somehow, was worse. Door 3, a house with laughter shoved into the corners to make space for grief in the middle. A girl your age watched you the way a mirror watches a window. You left her a ribbon, red as heat, and pinned it with a nail you didn't remember taking from your pocket. The mother whispered thanks like a confession. The father's mouth shaped why and chose not to finish the letter. You left before the lantern leaned into the question. By door 6, the village had learned a new ritual. When the lantern comes, don't speak first. Let the light declare what it wants, and what it wanted mostly was witness. Your hand hovered over bread, rope, cradle, ledger, doorframe. The flame would bow or refuse, and you would obey the answer. It should have felt like power. It felt like carrying weather. Somewhere behind you, the priest's bell found a rhythm that could pass for piety. Somewhere beyond that, the boundary stone rehearsed its old trick, sounding like stone pretending to be a lock. Between rings, you heard the deliberate poem of Boots, the hangman, close or far or everywhere. He didn't correct you. He didn't help. He let the village measure itself against your shadow and decide whether to shrink or grow. You turned down the lane that ran toward the manor. Snow lay there in cleaner sheets, as if the rich had managed to tax even the weather. Lantern light struck the gate and came back colder. You paused. The flame leaned right and stayed. Your stomach dropped to floor. Right meant west. West meant steward. Steward meant a circle you didn't draw, but were somehow standing inside. The mask grew heavy, then light, then heavy again, like a thought arguing with itself. "Stop," someone whispered. It was your mother, behind you, shawl borrowing her shape. She hadn't followed. She'd arrived, which is different. Some people walk. Mothers occur. Her hand rose, hovered an inch from your arm, stopped short of touching wood. "Come home." The request contained both prayer and ultimatum. The lantern's flame made a small, traitorous bow toward her voice. You closed your fist on the handle until iron considered becoming bone. The manor door opened without a knock. The Lord, not old exactly, just born with the kind of face winter enjoys, stepped into the threshold. Men flanked him, steel rehearsing outrage. "Enough theatre," he said, which proved he didn't understand the square at all. Life here had always been theatre. The scaffold was simply the best seat. "Remove that article." His hand flapped at the mask, the vague flinch of a man unused to naming anything that could refuse him. You didn't move. The lantern's flame refused to lean. Silence collected on the stones like frost that wanted to become ice. You drew a small circle on the gate's post. Line, patient. A guard lunged. Your flame snapped sideways, quick as a snake, bright as a slap, and his courage sat down. The Lord's mouth worked through a few verbs and selected none. "Who gives you leave?" he finally managed. The mask answered for you. "Winter." Your own voice startled you. It sounded like wood learning grammar. And the count of steps. You raised the lantern, and for a second, its fire painted the Lord's face with the same color that lives inside ovens and gallows. The men put their swords away because Hans had discovered they preferred being alive. You didn't enter. You left a single object on the gate's stone, the bell with wool stuffed into its throat. You hadn't meant to bring it. It had followed anyway. The Lord stared at the gagged mouth of metal like a man reading the future in a mirror. Mute, fixed, waiting to ring when someone pulled the right rope. He didn't chase you when you turned. That was the cleverest thing he did all winter. Back through the lane, through the square, past the priest's exhausted bell, past your father's held breath and your brother's guarded cough. Your mother walked beside you without touching. The houses lowered their eyelids. Snow practiced forgetting. The hangman existed at the edge of every frame, a punctuation mark insisting on the end of every sentence. At your door you stopped. The chalk by your hearth glowed softly, held down by the red ribbon and the nail. The rope on the table had arranged itself into a question mark, which felt rude. You set the lantern there on the question, and the flame leaned right, then left, then chose center, as if announcing a truce you didn't trust. You lifted the mask an inch. Air hit your face like an accusation. The world widened so fast it hurt. For a heartbeat, you were just a girl with a tired mother, a quiet father, a coughing brother, a house that smelled like smoke and soup and worry. Then the mask settled again. Voluntary, brutal kindness, and the tunnels returned to escort you through the next decision. That's when the door, 3 houses down, the one with the blue shutter and the habit of laughter, opened all by itself. No knock, no voice. Just a mouth of darkness inviting light to test its teeth. The lantern bowed toward it of its own mind. You felt the village tilt. You felt the rope on your table remember a name you hadn't spoken yet. You stepped once, twice. The third step hung in the air like a snowflake, deciding whether to be water or knife. And as your boot came down, the hangman's lantern, wherever he was, whoever held it, answered your flame with a lean you couldn't mistake, right. The villagers didn't sleep that night. Not really. They scattered back to their homes, doors slammed, shutters barred, prayers whispered with the speed of panic. But sleep? No. Sleep avoids places where symbols glow on stone, and children wear masks that make their voices sound borrowed. The girl didn't sleep either. She sat in the circle she had drawn, lantern flickering in her hand, chalk crumbling slowly in her pocket. The mask pressed against her skin like a second skull. Every time she exhaled, her breath came back louder inside the wood, as though the mask wanted to be sure she didn't forget she was wearing it. She thought about lifting it off, but the thought itself tightened it. So she left it on. Her family didn't come near. The mother sat in the corner, rosary muttered to the rhythm of fear. The father cleaned his boots again and again, as though polishing them would erase the sound of heavier ones outside. The boy dozed but whimpered through dreams, coughing once, twice, then muttering, "Don't open it," even in sleep. They gave her space, but not respect. Respect would have meant asking questions. Instead, they treated her like the rope on the table, a thing to avoid touching because touching meant responsibility. The lantern leaned right again. The chalk mark by the hearth brightened. The girl understood the pattern now. Lean, pulse, weight. The house was speaking to her in a language she hadn't learned but somehow remembered. She wondered if the hangman had gone through this too, years ago, when someone else handed him a mask. Maybe that's how every story started, not with choice, with inheritance. Outside, the village had changed. No one laughed. The baker's wife baked bread shaped like knots, sold them cheap, said they kept death busy chewing. The miller stopped grinding at night, afraid the wheel's groan would sound like boots. Children played no games. Instead, they practiced being silent as though rehearsing for their own knocks. Even the priest shortened his sermons, afraid to speak longer than the lantern's patience. The girl carried the lantern into the square the next evening. She didn't mean to, but the flame tugged her hand the way dogs tug leashes. People stopped what they were doing. Markets froze. Conversations clipped their own tongues. All eyes turned toward her. The mask made her tall, the lantern made her loud, and the chalk in her pocket made her dangerous. The villagers didn't know if they should bow or run, so they just stared. The hangman wasn't there. His absence was louder than his presence. It made people wonder if he'd left the ritual behind, or if he was waiting for her to prove she could continue it. The priest tried to speak again, voice thin as candle smoke. "Child, come to the chapel. Let us pray." The girl didn't answer. She only tilted the lantern, letting the flame lean left. A hush fell over the square, deeper than silence, like a pit dug under the earth. And then she did the thing no one expected. She knocked 3 times. Against the well's stone lip, thud, thud, thud. The sound carried like thunder with manners. Villagers gasped, crossed themselves, clutched sleeves and throats. The well answered with an echo so perfect it sounded alive. The flame leaned harder. The chalk in her pocket grew warm. The girl straightened. Through the tunnels of the mask, the square looked smaller, almost manageable. People backed away from her path. Doors shut themselves without hands. Windows blinked closed. She realized she was walking the same rounds the hangman used to walk, boots without boots, a shadow without permission. And here's where your skin prickles, doesn't it? Because you can feel it too. The rhythm of her steps, the weight of the lantern, the hunger of the flame. You imagine her turning down your street, stopping at your door, pressing 3 knocks into your wood. Thud, thud, thud. Would you answer? Would you pretend to be asleep? Would you dare to hope she left nothing? The girl didn't yet understand her own power. She only knew the villagers looked at her the way they used to look at him, with a mixture of fear and gratitude, like people staring at a storm that waters their crops but also floods their homes. And storms don't explain themselves, they just arrive. When she returned home, the rope was no longer on the table. The mother swore she hadn't moved it. The father swore he hadn't touched it. The boy swore he'd seen it twitch itself off the edge and slither toward the chalk mark. And sure enough, there it was, coiled neatly at the center of the symbol, loop perfect, tail tucked, as if it had finally found its bed. The mask whispered in her ear, not in words but in intent. Now you understand. Gifts don't belong to givers. They belong to keepers. And now you are the keeper. She lay down beside the hearth, lantern at her side, rope at her feet, chalk in her pocket. The mask did not let her sleep, but it did let her rest in its version of silence. And for the first time in her short life, she realized she wasn't waiting for the knock anymore. She was carrying it. And that's worse because once you carry the knock, you have to decide where to drop it. The next morning, frost clung to the village like a debt collector. Every roof, every shutter, every wheel in the square looked wrapped in thin glass, as if the world itself had been preserved in fear. The villagers rose early, not out of piety or hunger, but out of caution, because no one wants to be caught sleeping when the ritual changes its shape. And it had changed. Word spread that the hangman had not made his rounds the night before. Some claimed he'd left the village altogether, disappearing into the forest where the snow is older than maps. Others swore they'd seen him at the edge of the square, watching the girl carry the lantern, letting her steps echo his own. The truth didn't matter. What mattered was that the knock had been heard, and it hadn't come from him. It had come from her. The baker's wife whispered it first. "She is the knock now." The miller repeated it louder. By noon, children whispered it in games they didn't finish. Parents muttered it like a superstition, and the priest spat it like a curse. A child with a mask, a lantern, and a rope in her house. That wasn't just scandal. That was succession. The girl didn't argue. Arguing would have been childish, and the mask didn't allow childish things anymore. She walked the square slowly, lantern swaying, chalk heavy in her pocket. People stepped aside. Even dogs didn't bark. She stopped at the well, traced the rim with her gloved finger, though she wasn't wearing gloves, and imagined how deep the echo went. Her father avoided her eyes. Her mother avoided her shadow. The boy clung to both as though one sister could be balanced by two frightened parents, but the house itself seemed to favor her. The chalk on the hearth glowed when she entered, dimmed when she left. The rope followed her steps across the floor like a trained animal. The lantern's flame leaned in whatever direction she thought of. The mask never asked to be removed, and she never dared to test whether she could. That night, the knock came again. Not from outside, from inside. 3 thuds, not on the door but on the wall behind the hearth. The family froze. The mother gasped as though punched. The father reached for the poker, realized it was useless, set it down again. The boy whimpered and pressed his face into the blankets. The girl rose. The mask turned her movement into a decree. She carried the lantern to the hearth. The chalk lines pulsed. The rope writhed once, like a snake stretching. She pressed the lantern against the wall and the flame leaned left. The thuds stopped. Her mother wept. Her father whispered, "What does it mean?" But the girl already knew. It meant the ritual didn't care about thresholds anymore. Knocks no longer needed doors. They could happen anywhere. They could happen inside. The next day, the priest came to the house. He brought incense and salt, his little traveling arsenal against demons. He stood in the doorway and demanded she remove the mask. She didn't answer. She simply tilted the lantern, letting the flame lean right. The chalk on the hearth answered by glowing brighter. The priest's incense stick sputtered, coughed, and went out. He paled. "The devil walks in your house," he croaked. "No," the girl said, voice hollow through wood. "The knock walks." The priest fled. By evening, half the village knew. Some crossed themselves whenever she passed. Others bowed slightly, unwillingly, as though their spines remembered something their mouths refused to admit. Children began carving little circles in the snow with sticks, copying what they'd seen her do in the square. Their parents pulled them away in terror, but the shapes remained, glowing faintly at dusk, before vanishing by dawn. The hangman did not appear. His absence became its own presence, a ghost heavier than flesh. The villagers began to wonder if he'd left because his work was finished, or worse, because his work was now hers. That night, she didn't wait for the knock. She made it. 3 thuds on the door of her own house. Her family screamed, thinking someone had come. But when they realized it was only her, their faces shifted into something uglier than fear, resignation. Because if the knock could come from within, then nowhere was safe. She carried the lantern into the street. Snow hissed underfoot, lantern flame steady, mask tunnels narrowing the world into obedience. She chose a door. The baker's. She knocked once. The door opened instantly, as though the wife had been waiting, hands clasped, eyes hollow. The girl didn't enter. She only tilted the lantern. The flame leaned left. The wife sobbed, nodded, and closed the door again. The girl walked on. Another door. Another knock. Another tilt. No words. Only signals. By the 3rd house, no one resisted. Doors opened before she raised her hand. People bowed their heads as if she were blessing them. Blessing, warning. What's the difference when both make you behave? And here's the part that keeps you awake. You've already started to hear it yourself, haven't you? That phantom knock. 3 dull thuds against your own wall, your own door, your own skull. Thud, thud, thud. You tell yourself it's the pipes, the wind, a neighbor. But deep down, you know the truth. The knock travels. The knock doesn't belong to one house, one village, one time. The knock belongs everywhere. By midnight, the girl had walked half the village. No rope needed, no sack, no gallows. Just a mask, a lantern, a knock. And the terrifying thing? People obeyed. When she returned home, the rope coiled itself at her feet like a pet expecting praise. The chalk circle at the hearth glowed like an ember refusing to die. And the mask? Ah, the mask whispered now, in words instead of intent. You don't need him. You never did. The hangman was only the rehearsal. You are the performance, she didn't argue. She couldn't. By the third night, the village had stopped pretending. No one waited for the hangman anymore. They waited for her. Doors stayed half open, shutters unlatched, candles burning low, as if the whole square had been rehearsing the role of guilty suspect in a trial with no judge. The girl didn't need to knock. She only needed to walk, and the lantern did the rest. The flame leaned. The people obeyed. Her own family didn't speak to her now. They lived in her house as if it belonged to someone else, tiptoeing around the chalk symbol, eating away from the table where the rope coiled like punctuation. Her father stopped cleaning his boots. Her mother stopped her prayers. The boy stopped coughing, not because he healed, but because sound felt dangerous in a house where the knock lived. The girl didn't mourn this silence. She wore it. It fit as tightly as the mask. And yet, she wasn't free. Every time she passed the boundary stone, she felt it click. Stone on stone, the sound of a lock rehearsing. It told her the same truth over and over. You're not outside the ritual. You're only deeper inside it. She wasn't breaking the circle, she was walking it. That night, the lantern leaned left at her own threshold. She froze. Until now, it had always leaned at other people's doors. Never hers. The rope stirred. The chalk glowed. The mask whispered, "Everything you give away comes back." The boy whimpered. "Please don't knock," he begged, voice so small it almost broke the room. The mother pulled him close. The father gripped the poker, useless but heavy, as if weight itself might protect them. The girl lifted her fist, 3 thuds against her own door. The sound rattled inside the house like a second heart. Her family screamed. She stepped outside. Snow drank the noise instantly. The lantern flame leaned again, left, then right, then finally up, tall and thin. At the edge of the square, a figure waited. Hood lowered, lantern unlit, sack resting heavy against his leg. The hangman. Her breath stuck behind the mask. She walked toward him, boots cutting the snow into long, straight arguments. He didn't move until she reached the boundary stone. Then he lifted his head. For the first time, she felt his gaze, not like a weight, but like a mirror. He raised his lantern. No flame, only dark glass. She raised hers. Fire steady, flame alive. 2 lanterns facing each other, one empty, one burning. The villagers, watching from cracks and corners, held their breath. The priest clutched his book to his chest. The Lord's men gripped hilts but didn't draw. Even the wind froze as if afraid to pick a side. The hangman lifted his free hand and pointed at the mask. Not a command, a question. Yours or mine? Her hands trembled. The mask pressed tighter, not wanting to be removed, but she lifted it anyway, just a little. Cold air hit her face, sharp as teeth. The villagers gasped. Her family sobbed. The hangman tilted his head, waiting. She held the mask out. He didn't take it. Instead, he pointed at the chalk circle glowing faintly behind her, at the rope coiled like a sentence waiting for a period, at the lantern burning in her hand. Then he lowered his own lantern to the snow. Its dark glass caught her fire's reflection and pretended to glow. And in that gesture she understood. He wasn't giving her the role. He was showing her she already had it. The villagers murmured. The priest shouted something about devils. The Lord's men stepped forward, but the lantern flame leaned toward them like a blade and they froze. The girl placed the mask back on her face. The wood sealed her breath again. The hangman turned and walked into the forest. No sack, no rope, no flame. He vanished into the snow like a rule erased from the book. The girl returned to the square. She knocked once on the well. The sound echoed everywhere. Doors opened without hesitation. Candles bent toward her. And the villagers, one by one, lowered their heads. Not in prayer, in surrender. And you're lying there, wide awake now, telling yourself it's just a story. But you already feel it, don't you? The mask pressing against your face, the lantern handle warming your palm, the weight of a knock waiting in your hand. You wonder if someone will hear it tonight. You wonder if maybe you'll be the one to deliver it. Because the truth is simple. The hangman was only the beginning. The knock belongs to whoever dares to carry it. And tonight, it isn't him. It's her. And maybe, just maybe, it's you. Power never arrives. It accrues flake by flake like snow, pretending to be harmless until roofs remember gravity. By the fourth night, you don't take the square. You inherit its hesitation. People fold themselves around your path. The lantern writes your biography in light, and the mask edits your thoughts down to verbs. Walk, knock, decide. Somewhere, a door slams too loud and apologizes to itself. Somewhere else, a laugh tries the air, then crawls back under a coat. Even the dogs get theological, staring at you as if salvation might smell like smoke and old wood. You keep thinking you're going to wake up. You don't. Dreams are sloppy. This is precise. The flame leans. The chalk warms your pocket. The rope at home changes position by inches you didn't grant. The boundary stone clicks at odd hours, the way a tongue clicks at bad manners. You lift the lantern to eye height and sweep the street. Faces bow, windows blink. A stray ribbon licks across the snow like a red warning that learned to crawl. Your mother walks beside you sometimes, not touching, shawl a moon that can't quite affect your tides. Your father trails a pace behind like a witness rehearsing neutrality. Your brother counts your steps under his breath, losing his place whenever the flame leans sharply right. West, always west, as if the village's compass suddenly discovered a preference. No one mentions the Hangman. His name has become an echo that broke its ankle. You make your first real mistake at the corner by the mill, though to be fair, you only notice it was a mistake later, when mistakes grow fangs in memory. Airboy ducks around the flour sacks and thinks he can sprint past before your light decides to see him. He's quick, and hunger makes quickness look like wisdom. You shift the lantern, cradling it higher, pure reflex, and the flame bows toward him with a sudden liquid obedience. He stops dead, breath a white knot, eyes hooked to the mask like fish that volunteered for hooks. You lower the lantern. He doesn't move. You tilt it left. He flinches. You tilt it right. He flinches differently. You say through wood, "Go home." He goes. Power is a leash even when you don't mean it to be. "Careful," your mother whispers, voice frayed on the edges where love and warning stitch each other. You don't answer. Not because you're cruel, but because the tunnels of the mask don't carry softness well. They carry order. You keep walking. At the well, the priest stands with his little army of symbols. Book, salt, brass cross, dulled by too many hopeful thumbs. He raises the cross when you approach, not as an attack but a test. Your lantern's flame doesn't lean. It watches, as if evaluating metal's opinion of light. He clears his throat. "Child," he begins, choosing the word that lets him enjoy authority while pretending compassion. "The village needs peace." Your mouth tastes cedar. Peace is what people call fear when it behaves. He winces. The cross declines to glow. And judgment? Judgment is what fear calls itself when it wants a job. Your father inhales through his teeth, a sound that apologizes for you without permission. The priest tries another route. And mercy. You tilt the lantern so the flame stares straight into the well's throat. The echo that comes back sounds like rain thinking better of itself. Mercy, you say, is a rope that remembers to be a ribbon first. He lowers the cross. It looks heavier now. Who taught you that? You don't look west. You don't have to. Counting. The crowd loosens in little ripples, relieved that the conversation didn't end in fire. You leave the priest at the well with his symbols sulking, and the well with its mouth respectfully shut. As you pass the baker's stall, she slips you a heel of bread shaped like a knot and won't let you return it. It's warm. Warmth is treason against winter. You tuck it into your coat, and for 6 steps you feel human enough to hate the mask. On the 7th step you remember doors exist, and the feeling trims itself obedient again. The road to the manor waits like a dare that learned to stand still. You avoid it, not because of fear. Fear is familiar, but because you can feel the narrative tighten whenever you set a boot on those cleaner drifts. The lantern's flame leans right of its own will, and the right is a slope, and slopes love bodies. You choose the lane toward the poor end instead, where snow turns grey on contact, where shutters sag and gossip has chapped lips. Door after door, the ritual goes quiet and sure. Knock, tilt, nod, leave. A coin to a widow, a taper to a newborn's exhausted mother, a stern, unblinking nothing to the man whose flour measures learned convenient arithmetic. At the threshold of a house whose roof has survived only on the bargaining skills of prayer, you find a little wax figure sitting on the step, a toy saint with a face melting toward forgiveness. You set the lantern by it a moment. The flame leans as if listening. Inside, a cough stops, not healed, paused. Sometimes theatre buys time. By afternoon, the square invents its own rumor to stay warm. The peddler's cart has been found upright again. People swear they saw the hangman alone in the ditch at dawn, lifting the axle by himself, breath like iron steam. Others insist you did it without touching it, that the lantern leaned and the wheels remembered the concept of round. You don't correct either story. Let myths warm their hands over you. Fire is fire. Twilight. The village shrinks to its lit edges. Everything black beyond looks hungry but bored. Your mother has gone home ahead of you to coax soup into believing in flavor. Your father lingers with the miller because men have to look busy when the plot thickens. Your brother tucks himself into your shadow because that's where the world feels formatted. He asks, small and fearless in the way children can be when they don't know how much the bill will cost later. If you take off the mask, will the lantern follow your face or your name? You open your mouth. The mask answers, neither. It follows the knock. He nods like that's not terrible. You sense the click before you hear it. Boundary stone, distant, polite, west. The lantern's flame shivers once, then leans so decisively right it drags your wrist. Your brother glances up, lips forming the number he thinks the steps will be. You look at the square, at doors, at candles, at the priest's stubborn cross and the well's-earned discretion, and know the story refuses to stay domestic tonight. You go alone. The boy doesn't argue. He has learned the most adult lesson of all. Sometimes love is staying where the avalanche isn't. Past the older line, the snow records everything with the accuracy of a bored clerk. You follow boot tracks that aren't there and still manage to step in them. The boundary stone smirks the way stones do when they've been here longer than verbs. The forest holds its breath until you enter, then exhales behind you, closing the world like a book that isn't finished but needs a nap. He's waiting. Not at a center. Centers are lies, but at a convocation of chance. 3 birches trapped mid-curtsy by ice, a fallen limb like an underline, a pocket of windless night. The hangman's hood is a private eclipse. His lantern is dark, glass clouded with ghost heat. He stands not like a threat but like a thesis. You stop 2 paces away. The flame in your lantern bows right, then steadies out of embarrassment. You want words. The mask has retired words for the evening. He raises an object instead. Your crooked wooden horse liberated from snow. Legs still short but now shod with a tiny iron sleeve, a splint hammered from a nail's confession. He sets it on the fallen limb. It balances without tricks. For a heartbeat the tunnels widen. Childhood elbows you in the ribs to say, hey, you don't cry. The mask doesn't allow salt, but the skin under it learns the shape of tears anyway. He gestures. A tiny tilt of the hand, like asking a candle if it minds being borrowed. You lift your lantern. He lifts his. Dark meets light. For a moment the 2 glasses reflect each other until they look like eyes embarrassed to be watching. Then he does the unthinkable. He opens his lantern and shows you the empty cradle where a wick would live. No wick, no oil, only a hollow that remembers flame. He closes it. Your flame dips, then rises taller, as if to say, I can carry both of us. He nods, once, in a grammar older than obedience. From the village the bell cries out, 3 quick strikes that sound like someone scolding God for being late. You turn. He doesn't. He reaches into his sack and removes a bundle wrapped in the color that hides everything badly. He doesn't offer it. He sets it between you and steps back so the bundle owns the space. When the wind pulls at the cloth, you see what's underneath. Not rope, not bones, wood, long, straight, planed with care. Beams, 2, crossed by habit. You shake your head before your neck votes. He doesn't argue. He lifts the horse, pockets it like a verdict, and points toward the village with the hand that knows knots. You understand. The gallows you saw in snow wasn't hallucination. It was preview. He turns to leave, then hesitates. With his free hand, he draws a small circle in the frost with a gloved finger and taps the center twice, as if knocking on winter itself. You kneel and press your chalk there. The flame in your lantern leans, kisses glass, straightens. When you lift the chalk, the circle holds bright against dark, hot against cold. A door drawn on ice. He is gone by the time you stand. The forest laughs without sound. You pick up the bundle. Light, too light. The heaviness comes later, and carry it toward the bell that still argues with the sky. Each step writes a sentence no one wants to read. Halfway back, you practice a line you might say, to the priest, to your mother, to the village, to the man with clean snow. This is not a gallows. The mask edits it. This is a gate. Both are true. That's the worst part. You enter the square, and the crowd assembles itself like magnets reminded of their job. The priest asks nothing. The Lord's men posture, then remember their families. Your mother's hands fold into the shape of prayer and stay there because unfolding would be betrayal. Your brother counts to the number the bell reached, then keeps counting because numbers feel like walls. You lay the beams down gently, so gently the stones blush. The lantern leans right once and returns to center, a truce signed in flame. And as the first nail glints, bent smile catching light, you hear it again from inside your own bones. Thud, thud, thud. Not at any door. At the idea of door. You look up. Everyone is already looking down. That's how surrender appears. Staring at shoes so you won't have to watch the sky agree. You raise the lantern. The flame steadies. Tomorrow, you say through wood. Tomorrow accepts. Tomorrow didn't arrive with dawn. Dawn arrived with tomorrow. Light bled slow across the square, soft as flour sifted through regret, and every villager stepped into the day knowing they owed it a debt. Not food, not coin. Something harder. Something bone-shaped. The beams lay where you left them, crossed politely on the stones. Frost bit their edges, but they didn't crack. Wood never cracks when it knows it's been chosen. Your lantern sat beside them, flame upright, perfectly centered, as though daring the sun to try and outshine it. The mask clung to your face with the intimacy of a secret too expensive to tell. The priest was the first to speak. He gathered a circle of villagers and pointed at the beams. "This is blasphemy," he declared, though his voice trembled like a bell rope in weak hands. "The hangman has abandoned us. The child has taken his mantle. But this gallows is not God's." Someone muttered, "Then whose is it?" Another whispered, "Ours." A third, "Hers." The priest tried again. "Tear it down." He bent to lift one beam. The moment his fingers touched the wood, the flame in your lantern leaned left. He dropped it, hissing like a man burned, though no smoke rose from his skin. The crowd stepped back. Fear is contagious, it sneezes. Your father shifted his weight, staring at the beams with a craftsman's eye. He'd built barns, carts, fences. Wood was his language. He muttered, almost without meaning to, "They're true," meaning straight, meaning sound, meaning ready. Your mother pulled him back by the sleeve, as if those words had been a confession. The boy pressed against her skirts. His eyes locked on you. He mouthed a number. 7? 8? He was counting your breaths again. You almost smiled. The mask turned it into a grimace. By midday, the beams were no longer wood. They were theater. People gathered to stare, to whisper, to pretend they didn't glance at you as often as at the priest. The Lord's men patrolled but didn't intervene. They liked their swords sharp, but not sharper than fate. The hangman himself never appeared. His absence thickened into a cloak the whole village wore. When the sun dropped low, you rose. You carried the lantern to the beams. The flame leaned right. The chalk in your pocket pulsed. The rope at home, coiled, patient, waiting, seemed to tug at your memory like a leash. You drew a circle on the stone beside the beams. Line, line, old grammar. The villagers gasped softly, the way people gasp when the sermon is worse than the sin. You pressed your palm to the circle. When you lifted it, the chalk glowed. And then you spoke through wood. "This is not a gallows." The priest spat. "It is a gallows. This," you repeated louder, the lantern bowing in rhythm, "is a gate." The villagers shifted. Some nodded, unsure why. Others crossed themselves, unsure against what. The beams didn't answer. Beams are patient. Beams know the argument ends in their favor. Night arrived without waiting for permission. The lantern's flame bowed again. Right, then left, then center. You felt it choose. And as it chose, you realized, the beams wouldn't stay beams forever. The village wouldn't stay a village forever. And you wouldn't stay a child forever. The mask wouldn't allow it. At home, the rope no longer lay on the table. It had climbed to the hearth and wrapped itself once, twice around the chalk symbol, as if fastening the circle to the world. Your father refused to look. Your mother whispered, It moves like it knows. The boy asked, "Will it climb me too?" You couldn't answer. The mask wouldn't allow it. That night you dreamed of doors. Not houses, not churches, not barns, just doors, hanging in air, in snow, in water, in sky, each with a knock that sounded like your own fist. Some opened, some didn't. Behind one you saw the crooked horse walking straight-legged. Behind another the hangman, hood off, but his face was yours. Behind another, nothing at all, just waiting. You woke with the shape of wood pressed into your cheek, and for a moment you couldn't tell if you'd slept at all. Morning again. The beams still lay in the square, but now they leaned against each other, someone, or something, having lifted them in the night. The priest swore no one touched them. The miller swore he heard boots. The baker swore she saw your lantern walking the lane, though you'd been asleep. The truth didn't matter. The beams were upright now, kissing sky, shadows stretching across the square like a sundial that measured only endings. The villagers didn't gather this time. They scattered. Better to be elsewhere when symbols grow teeth. Only your family lingered, and even they kept distance. The boy held a stone ready to throw it at nothing. The mother clutched her apron strings like reins. The father whispered the names of tools under his breath, as though listing hammers and saws might protect him. You stood before the beams. The lantern flame bowed low, low until it almost died, then rose again, tall as judgment. The mask tightened. You lifted your hand and knocked once against the wood. Thud. The sound rolled through the square, through the village, through the forest. Birds fled, bells shook, shutters rattled. The boundary stone clicked. Thud. The rope at your hearth slithered off the stone and into the snow, dragging itself toward the square. The chalk circles children had scratched into frost, lit up faintly like a map revealing roads. Thud. The beams groaned, not cracking, stretching. They wanted to be taller. They wanted to finish becoming what they were meant to be. The villagers returned despite themselves. Curiosity is stronger than fear, it just lies about its name. They gathered at the edges of the square, silent, watching. You stepped back. The lantern flame leaned left. The mask whispered through your bones. It's ready. And here's where you realize, lying awake, that you've been waiting too. For what? For this? For the knock? You hear it already, don't you? 3 thuds inside your own skull. Thud, thud, thud. You tell yourself it's the story. But stories don't echo in your bones unless they've decided to rent the place. The girl in the mask stood before the beams, lantern bowing, rope slithering closer. The priest whispered prayers no one believed. The villagers clutched each other and didn't blink. The boy began counting again, lips pale, breath white. The mother looked at you like you were both her daughter and her punishment. And the hangman, still absent, still missing, still everywhere. Because absence, like wood, always finds a way to stand. The beams didn't stop growing. That was the first betrayal. You thought they'd stay fixed, a monument of wood and fear planted in the square. But no. Each dusk they stretched higher, joints groaning like teeth being ground by a patient jaw. By the 3rd night they dwarfed the chapel spire. By the 5th, their shadows reached the boundary stone at noon. People whispered that the beams were measuring the village for a coffin. The rope slithered to them willingly, dragging itself across the square, coil uncoiling, tail flicking like it enjoyed the journey. It climbed the beams with the skill of ivy, knotting itself without hands. By dawn it hung perfect, a loop, a promise, a mouth. The villagers didn't speak of it, but no one walked under the shadow anymore. They circled wide, carrying bread, water, gossip, all of it bent around the gallows that wasn't a gallows, that you had called a gate. The mask pressed closer every day. Sometimes you felt it pulse like it had veins of its own. Sometimes you caught yourself listening through it instead of your ears. It fed on silence, and the village provided plenty. No laughter, no songs, not even the priest's bells. The only sound that mattered was the knock, and it came from you. And here's where your stomach flips, doesn't it? Because you can already feel the weight of wood on your face, the lantern handle carving a groove into your palm. You imagine stepping into that square, villagers parting, silence waiting for your knock. Would you do it? Would you raise your hand and let the echo travel? The girl, mask, lantern, rope in her shadow, kept walking. Each night, she made her rounds. Knock, tilt, lean. Doors opened, heads bowed, silence thickened. The priest tried once more to exorcise her. He scattered salt in her path. The lantern flame leaned, salt hissed, and the crystals melted into water. He dropped the brass cross, and it sank into snow, as if ashamed of metal. He didn't try again. The Lord's men attempted a braver ritual. They blocked the road with spears and declared the beams illegal. The mask didn't laugh. Masks don't waste humor. But the flame leaned right and the wood of their spears split down the middle. One guard lost his grip. The spear fell, point first, and stuck upright in the snow, shivering like it knew it had betrayed its owner. The men scattered. The villagers didn't cheer, they only nodded as if another law had been written, and this one would last longer. The boy, your brother, stopped counting your steps. He counted your knocks instead. Each night he whispered the number to himself. 20 knocks, 50, 100. What happens when I lose count? He asked once, eyes wide, voice smaller than the question deserved. You couldn't answer. The mask wouldn't allow it. The gallows became a calendar. Villagers measured their days not by sun or bell, but by whether the rope swayed in the wind. If it swayed east, a birth. West, a death. Straight down, silence. They began leaving offerings beneath it. Bread, cloth, even the tin stars the peddler once sold. Children dared each other to touch the beams, but none did. One boy claimed he saw the wood grow an inch while he watched. No one argued. And you sit there, in your room, in your bed, telling yourself this is all theater. But when the floor creaks under you tonight, you'll wonder if it's only a house settling, or if beams are stretching taller while you blink. The girl never saw the hangman again. Not in the square, not in the forest, not even in dreams. But she felt him, in the way the boundary stone clicked sometimes without reason, in the way the mask tightened whenever she faltered, in the way her lantern's flame bowed as though saluting someone just beyond her sight. He hadn't left. He'd stepped sideways, into absence, into myth. And myths don't need boots to keep walking. One night, snow fell heavier than prayer. The square vanished under white, beams half buried at their base. The villagers gathered anyway, huddled in silence, watching as you approached. The flame leaned, the rope swayed. The mask whispered one word, choose. Choose what? The villagers. A name. A door. Yourself. She raised her hand, knocked once. Thud. The beams groaned, wood bending like a bow. Knocked twice. Thud. The rope swayed harder, loop twisting like it smelled a neck. Knocked thrice. Thud. The square shook. Shutters clattered open. The priest screamed. The villagers bowed, not in prayer but in resignation. The mask burned hot against her skin, and for one long, horrible moment, she believed it would fuse to her forever. And maybe it did, because from that night on, the villagers stopped calling it the hangman's gallows. They called it the child's gate, and whenever the lantern leaned, whenever the knock came, they opened their doors without question. And you will too, won't you? When the knock finds your wall, your floor, your chest, thud, 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 you'll open. Because that's what the story has been teaching you all along, not to fear the knock, to obey it. By the 9th night, the village had a new silence, the expensive kind that's purchased with obedience. Doors opened before you raised your hand. Candles bowed when your lantern arrived. The beams no longer looked like wood. They looked like a verdict learning posture. Even the snow stopped squeaking near the child's gate, as if sound itself understood court etiquette. You didn't feel powerful. You felt formatted. The mask trimmed every thought to fit the tunnel. The lantern added punctuation. The rope at home, your house's new pet, slept by the hearth with one eye open, like a guard hired by fear. You start to wonder, lying there listening, whether stories like this ever end gently. Spoiler, they don't. They end like winter. Slowly at first, then all at once. Before that though, do the ritual you can control. Tap subscribe like you're latching a shutter against polite weather, and check the pinned comment for the Christmas calendar. The countdown that admits day 24 is a door and still asks you to open it. Okay, back to the square. The priest called an assembly, not in the chapel. The gate had outgrown sanctuaries, but in the market where truths have always been bartered. He climbed a crate and wore an expression that tried to borrow courage from altitude. We must reclaim Christmas, he declared, which sounded heroic until you noticed his hands shaking. We must take back the night from masks and symbols. He never said your name. Names give leverage. He said child, the way a man says problem to avoid consequence. People listened because listening is cheaper than acting. The Lord's men hovered like punctuation marks, waiting to decide whether the sentence would end in a period or a blade. The baker's wife clutched a ribbon and a loaf and looked ready to defend both with equal ferocity. The miller rubbed his scale pans as if fondling a conscience. Your mother stood with your brother in the second row, chin up, eyes level, a woman who had decided to survive, and to make surviving look like defiance. Your father hung back, as men with calloused hands do when words start pretending to be nails. You walked into the circle without hurry. The lantern leaned just a little right, enough to remind the crowd that decisions could still be forced. The mask narrowed the priest to a moving candle with nerves. Reclaim it from what? You asked. Voice wood-sour, steady. From terror, he said. You tilted the lantern toward the well. The echo came back with manners. Then stop selling terror to pay for peace. The crate creaked under him. He looked to the Lord's men, to the sky, to the gate, anywhere but into the tunnels that were your eyes. There must be mercy. Mercy is a door that still locks, you said. The gate is a door that tells the truth. From the edge of the market came a thin voice like twine pulled too tight. The beadle. If it's a gate, where does it lead? He'd lost weight since the steward's snowbed. Fear burns calories faith can't replace. You pointed the lantern at the beams. The flame rose, choosing center. Forward, you said. That answer satisfied no one and angered only the wind. But it ended the assembly because endings prefer ambiguity. It gives them room to breathe. The crowd drifted. Men turned their swords into decorations again. Women turned their fear into recipes again. The priest climbed down, smaller at ground level. He did not bless you, he did not condemn you. He did what most leaders do when stories outrun doctrine. He waited for events to choose his opinion. That evening, your brother tugged your sleeve. There's a boy, he whispered, eyes hot. By the ditch where the peddler's cart used to sleep. He wants to run. Everyone wants to run. Why tell me? Because running makes the knock chase, he said. Clever child. Dangerous child. You found the boy by the ditch, thin, fast, bones arranged for fleeing. He watched the gate from far away with a hope that refused to die just because the world liked killing. If I leave tonight, he said without greeting, will it follow? You lifted the lantern. The flame leaned left, then right, then up. Non-committal, which was its own kind of cruelty. You can run, you told him, the mask cutting away tenderness. But the step that saves you and the step that condemns you feel the same while your foot is in the air. He swallowed and nodded, which is what humans do when fate speaks in riddles. If I stay, then you're counted. He didn't ask counted for what. People rarely ask when the answer might be exact. He left, not running, not staying, doing that third thing cowards and saints both master, circling. When you returned home, the rope was gone from the hearth. Your mother stood with the poker raised as if the weapon could discipline dust. It left, she said. I watched it crawl like a word learning legs. She sounded proud and terrified, which is how mothers sound when their lives discover plot. The chalk on the hearth had cracked, not broken, a smile with too many teeth. The lantern bowed toward it, acknowledging humor. In the night, the knock returned to your wall. Soft, not announcing, practicing. You answered from your pillow with the gentlest thud you could manage. The house relaxed a degree. You fell into a dream where the gate wore a wreath and apologized for everything while tightening its loop. It was almost funny, and then it wasn't at all. Morning delivered an absence wrapped in rumor. The hangman's cottage, small, mean, practical, stood empty. Not empty like gone to the forest, empty like never lived here. Tools missing, ash cold. Door off the hinge he had mended elsewhere for a lich gate. People came, stood in the threshold, and felt nothing where history should have raised gooseflesh. He was a story, someone said, finally honest. The village nodded. Stories make the best neighbors. They never borrow, they only haunt. At noon, the gate sang, not from wind, from wood. A long, low groan that climbed the beams and made the rope hum like a viol that had chosen a single devastating note. You walked to the square with your family, trailing like commas, trying to keep up with a sentence that had decided to sprint. The villagers formed two lines without being told, a corridor of breath and bowed heads. The priest tried to pretend procession had always been the plan. The Lord stayed inside and sent a window to watch for him. You stood beneath the loop. The flame rose to full height. A candle promoted to sword. Snow salted your shoulders. The mask squeezed until it felt like your skull had asked for a hug and gotten a clamp. You were not afraid. You were something worse. Convinced. "Today," you said through wood, and the word floated like ash toward faces that refused to inhale it. "Today, the gate opens." A tremor ran through the crowd. Your brother's lips moved. 1, 2, 3, counting how many decisions would happen before supper. Your mother's fingers braided her apron into a rope and then unbraided it with shame. Your father set his feet like nails locating wood. "Who?" the priest asked, voice hoarse with a courage he'd found in a drawer and dusted off. It wasn't accusation. It was surrender wearing hope like a disguise. You lifted the lantern and tilted it, slow as mercy. The flame leaned left, heads jerked, bodies reweighted themselves. A space opened in the crowd like water making room for stone. In that open mouth stood the baker's wife, ribbons in her fist, bread under one arm, eyes wide with a refusal that already knew its vote didn't count. "No," she said, as if no had ever worked. "Please." You didn't step toward her. You stepped toward the well and set the lantern on its stone lip. The flame steadied, a judge who had memorized all the laws and knew none of them mattered. Then you turned back to the crowd and, for the first time since the mask had learned your face, lifted it free. Gasp, knees, prayers. Half the village saw their daughter in your features. The other half saw their doom in the absence of anything else. You held the mask under your arm like a helmet and spoke in your own voice, which sounded smaller and truer and more lethal than wood. "No one," you said. The word hurt to birth. "Not today." The priest collapsed into gratitude he would later misname theology. The crowd sagged into relief that would curdle into resentment before dusk. The baker's wife cried, then hated herself for it, then loved you, then hated you more. Your brother stopped counting finally, because mercy scrambles math. Your mother looked at your bare face the way people look at fire, awed, warmed, certain it will burn them later. You raised the mask again. The village winced. You didn't put it on, yet. You lifted the lantern instead and let the flame lean wherever it wanted. It chose center, stubborn, exhausted, honest. "Tomorrow," you said, and the gate agreed with a creak that sounded like a promise learning vowels. That night the knock didn't come from your wall or the door or the well. It came from the idea of sleep itself, a thud that ran along the rim of everyone's dreams and shook them awake. People lit candles they didn't need and stared at doors that hadn't been accused yet. The snow listened without sympathy. The boundary stone clicked politely at odd intervals, as if clearing its throat before a speech. You lay on your pallet, mask on the floor, lantern between you and the roof's slow drip. Your brother's breaths evened. Your mother's hands finally let go of fabric. Your father's shoulders learned a softer shape, and you, eyes dry and teeth aching, stared at the ceiling and understood the worst truth of all. If the gate opens for no one, it will open for everyone. And that's a lesson even sleep refuses to teach gently. The next day dawned brittle, cold that cracked nails, light that felt thinner than usual. The beams in the square cast shadows too long for their height, stretching past the market, past the chapel, past the line of alder trees. People swore the shadows reached even further, into dreams, into walls, into thoughts they didn't invite. The gate wasn't just wood anymore, it was appetite, and appetite always wants names. The villagers gathered at noon, though no one said they would. They just arrived. That's how rituals mature, quietly, then all at once. The Lord's men stood in their corner with hands folded, eyes avoiding the rope. The priest clutched his cross with both hands, lips moving, words forgotten before they reached the air. Children sat on their mothers' skirts, silent, disciplined by fear more effectively than any parent's hand. You walked into the square with the lantern. The flame leaned left. Heads turned. Breath stopped. People shuffled aside until the baker's wife stood once again in the open mouth of space. Ribbons at her throat, bread at her side, terror in her jaw. "No," she said again, hoarser this time, a word bruised by repetition. The flame didn't correct itself. It held its lean, steady, deliberate. The rope swayed once, loop, whispering agreement. You wanted to say, "Not today." You wanted to lift the mask and stop the ritual in its throat. But the tunnels of the mask narrowed your hesitation into a path. The mask didn't care about mercy. Masks are hired to keep the schedule. The villagers looked at you. Some begged, Some demanded, most simply waited. That's worse. Waiting is agreement with extra steps. The baker's wife began to shake. "It's bread," she whispered almost to herself. "It's bread, not sin." Your father took one step forward, then stopped when the flame flared in warning. Your mother clutched your brother tighter, lips pressed so hard they bled. The priest finally found a word he trusted: confess. It cracked like dry wood. You lifted the lantern. The crowd inhaled like one body. And then you tilted it back, center. The flame straightened. The rope stilled. The beams groaned, disappointed. "Not today," you said. Relief rippled through the crowd like a tide. But tides leave wreckage behind. People collapsed into tears. Others clutched each other, shaking. Some glared at you, furious that mercy had been dangled and withdrawn. The baker's wife wept hardest of all, relief mixed with shame, mixed with dread. Because mercy doesn't erase, it delays. You turned and walked home. The villagers parted without words. Behind you, the gate creaked again, wood learning a new vowel, one closer to hunger. At home, the rope wasn't on the hearth. It was in your bed, coiled neatly on your blanket, loop facing the ceiling. You froze. The lantern flame flickered, almost smug. Your mother screamed, your father swore. The boy asked, "Does it sleep with you now?" The mask whispered, "It doesn't sleep, it waits." That night, the knock came from inside your chest. 3 dull thuds, not in the air, not on walls, inside your ribs. Thud, thud, thud. You pressed your hand to your sternum and felt it echo through bone. You sat upright all night, lantern burning beside you, mask watching from the floor. Sleep tried the door once, twice, then gave up. By morning, people were already whispering about the beams. "They lean," the miller said. "They're bending toward the houses." "They're choosing," the baker's wife muttered, though no one wanted to listen to her anymore. The priest claimed they were cursed. The Lord's men avoided the square altogether. You went anyway, lantern in hand, mask tight, chalk warm in your pocket. The beams loomed higher than ever, rope swaying like a heartbeat. The villagers followed at a distance, unable to stop themselves. You drew a circle on the stone before the beams, pressed your palm. The chalk glowed. The flame leaned right. The crowd gasped. The rope swayed harder. You turned to them. "The gate doesn't open because I choose," you said. "The gate opens because you wait." Silence. Heavy, sticky, binding. The boy, your brother, stepped forward. Small, fragile, but braver than sense allowed. "Then stop making us wait," the crowd murmured. The priest clutched his cross tighter. Your mother screamed his name. Your father tried to pull him back, but he stood, shaking, staring at you with a defiance that only children own. "Knock for me," he said. The mask squeezed your face until your teeth ached. The lantern flame trembled. The rope quivered like it had been given permission. And here's where you stop breathing, isn't it? Because you can already hear it. 3 dull thuds inside your chest, inside your walls, inside your head. Thud, thud, thud. And you're wondering right now if mercy even exists in this story, or if every door is only a delay before the rope. You lifted the lantern. The flame leaned, and the gate creaked in answer. You don't notice you're moving until the crowd parts, until your boots have already chosen stone over straw, until the lantern handle has pressed its small crown into your palm again. Your brother stands inside the hush you just created, chin up, eyes bright with the kind of courage that hasn't met its receipt yet. "Knock for me," he repeats, and the square ripples like a pond bullied by a single pebble. The priest's mouth opens around a prayer that misplaces the verb. Your mother says his name twice and forgets what comes after it. Your father makes a sound that only carpenters know, the noise wood makes when it splits in your hands. The mask tightens. It wants a schedule. The lantern's flame leans right, then shivers back to center as if remembering who's watching. The rope above hums once, a plucked vein. You want to tell your brother no. You want to stuff the word into his ears like wool and make him deaf to bravery. But the tunnels of the mask funnel your wants into corridors where only function fits. You kneel so your eyes and his are level, and the mask makes both of you into problem and solution. Why, you ask? Your voice coming out hollow as a church that's forgotten its choir. He swallows a small defiant sound. Because waiting is worse. He's right. You hate it. You love him for it. You hate him for being right about it. You stand. You lift the lantern, slow as an apology no one will accept. The flame tilts, indecisive, a compass arguing with itself. The crowd presses backward without moving. That's one of fear's favorite tricks. Stop. Your father's voice arrives like a tool thrown at a wall. Loud, honest, useless. He takes 2 steps, then freezes when the rope's loop swings and makes the air remember its neck. The priest raises his cross and lowers it, realizing symbols have to clock out sometime. The Lord's window closes, too polite to slam. Your brother doesn't flinch. He has your mother's stubborn spine and your father's exact posture when the nail bites wrong. Now, he says, and somehow you are both 7 again and centuries old. You set the lantern on the stone lip at your feet. Its flame chooses center, tall and thin as a verdict. You raise your fist. Thud. Not on wood, on the idea of wood. The sound spreads through the square like warm iron poured over ice. Thud. The beams answer with a groan that begins in their ankles and climbs to the loop. The rope sways, curious, a hunter who hasn't decided whether today is the day to be merciful. Thud. The boundary stone clicks. Doors remember hinges. A dozen candles inhale sharply and forget to exhale. Your brother doesn't flinch. He looks up into the rope the way people look into wells, aware that the reflection might belong to someone else. You pick up the lantern again and tilt it, left, then right, then deliberately back to center, as if teaching the flame the etiquette of mercy. The mask squeezes in disapproval that tastes like splinters. Not him, you say. Your own voice this time, slipping out around the wood, because sometimes the human leaks through even when the ritual has the good sense to be airtight. Not him. Silence. Then, from the line of villagers, a sound like cloth ripping. The baker's wife stepping forward, face set to the shape of debt. Take me, she says, and the word me lands like a loaf on a bare table. I have been counted longer. You shake your head. The flame refuses to lean. The rope settles as if it has heard its name and decided to ignore it. That's when the priest tries one last argument, the theological kind that hides fear in Latin. Choose no one, he pleads, throat raw. Close the gate. Gates don't close, you answer. They wait. Your brother reaches for your free hand and doesn't touch it. He doesn't need to. The space between your fingers fills with the shape of the gesture and completes itself. Let me end the waiting, he whispers, not brave now so much as tired of being small inside a large story. You could lie. You could tell him the knock doesn't care, but he's counted too many nights to believe you. So you do the one thing the mask hates. You remove it. Not all the way enough. The winter stabs your face with all the little knives it's been saving. The crowd shifts, exhale becoming weather. You lean close and let him see your mouth learning the word you never wanted. Live. You put the mask back on before the village can enjoy your softness for free. The flame lifts, a surprised spine. The rope settles. The gate quiets. For a heartbeat, the square is just a square again, a place where pears have been sold and gossip has learned choreography. You almost believe you escaped the sentence mid-verb. Then you hear it, faint but disciplined, marching up the lane, boots. The deliberate poem of them. The hangman's stride, exact as accountancy. The crowd parts again, not from respect. Respect burns too hot in winter, but from rehearsal. He walks into the square without a lantern, hood lower than you've ever seen, hands empty except for absence. Absence looks heavy in his grip. He stops 3 paces from you. The rope hums the way a crowd does when a king gets bored enough to wave. He lifts his head, not enough to show a face, enough to show the idea of one. You wait for him to reclaim the ritual like a father snatching a knife from a child's hand. He doesn't. He points at your brother. The mask tightens until it's a headache with ambitions. Your mother screams his name. Your father steps forward and is stopped by grammar older than law. The hangman's finger lowers. He points at you, then the beams, then the square, then opens his hand. Palm up. Choose. It would be easier if he were cruel. He is worse. Professional. You lift the lantern and it leans right as if pulled by tides. A collective whimper combs through the crowd. You straighten the flame with a disciplined wrist. It resists, then obeys. Your brother looks at you like a person looks at the cliff that both kills and delivers. You step past him, past your family, into the mouth the villagers made. Slow. Exact. 3 paces to the base of the beams where snow can't quite settle because decisions keep shaking it loose. You set the lantern down and press your palm to the post, cold you'll remember even if you forget your name. The wood thrums under your skin. The rope listens. Not him, you say again to beams, rope, stone, myth. Not anyone here. The hangman's hood tilts. Approval or pity, you can't afford to know. You turn to the crowd, find your brother's eyes through the small tunnel the mask allows, and hand him the lantern. He stumbles under its lightness the way a boy stumbles under his first lie. Hold it, you say, count. He nods, starts at 1 because beginnings are all he's met. The priest tries to step in, is gently refused by the way your shadow occupies space. The baker's wife sobs into her ribbon. Your father folds his hands as if wood taught him prayer. Your mother presses both palms to her mouth so the world won't escape. You reach up. The rope is closer than it looked when you were only watching. Things always are. You take the loop in both hands. It feels like a sentence you didn't write but can recite by heart. You lift it toward your neck, not as surrender, something more stubborn. Translation. A sound stops you, not a voice. A click, boundary stone, then another, and another, around the square, like a dull ring of keys deciding to be brave. Chalk circles the children drew in frost flare pale as fish under ice. Your brother loses count and laughs out a single terrified syllable. The lantern flame leans left of its own mind. The rope slackens, offended. You lower the noose, not yet, perhaps not ever. You turn back to the hangman, he hasn't moved. He has all the time that roles allow. You raise the mask an inch so your breath can be seen when you lie. Tomorrow, you tell him. He bows the smallest bow anyone has ever dared call respect. Then he turns and walks away, boots writing neat lines that snow reads aloud. The village stays perfectly still until absence reaches the alder line and climbs a tree. You face the crowd. Mercy once more? Or the worse mercy? Delay? The mask decides for you. That's what it was hired for. You put it back on. The world narrows to a duty you hate and a love you can't afford. Your brother clutches the lantern like a heart pulling itself together. Go home, you tell the village, and the village obeys because obedience is warmer than questions and tonight is colder than anything. They leave in knots, in pairs, in the single file lines fear prefers. The priest lingers, then bows to the gate as if bargaining. Your father rests his forehead against the post for half a second, long enough to be forgiven by the tree it used to be. Your mother says nothing. Her silence is a quilt you will never finish mending. Only you and your brother remain. He offers you the lantern back, hands shaking with the effort of bravery. You take it and lower the flame until it sits like an obedient coin. Together you walk to your door, passing chalk that remembers, stones that click, wood that waits. Inside, the rope isn't on the bed anymore. It's coiled on the threshold like a pet that has learned tricks. Stay, roll, remind. You step over it. Your brother doesn't. He kneels, touches the coil with 2 fingers, and whispers a number that means, I'm still here. You want to sleep. Sleep checks the window and decides to walk the long way around the village. So you sit in the lantern's province, the mask in your lap, the night rehearsing boots in your head. When your eyes finally sag, the house gives you a last, small gift, a knock the size of a raindrop, from nowhere in particular. Thud. You open them again. Tomorrow waits in the dark like a door with excellent manners. Morning doesn't come the way it used to. It used to creep through shutters, gentle as flower dust, polite enough to apologize for disturbing. Now it arrives like an auditor, abrupt, cold, merciless. The gate owns the horizon. Its shadow wakes people before the sun does. Villagers open their eyes to wood stretching taller, rope swaying slower, and realize they are living inside a sentence still waiting for its verb. The rope has grown bolder. It doesn't stay still anymore. At night, villagers swear they hear it dragging against the beams, not tightening, loosening, testing its grip. One woman claims she saw it crawl down to the ground and drink melted snow like a thirsty animal. The priest tells her to keep quiet, but everyone already knows. Secrets are just rumors with better posture. You walk into the square, lantern in hand, mask pressing against your skin like a bruise that refuses to fade. The villagers step aside instinctively. They don't talk now. Not to you, not to each other. Silence is the only grammar left that doesn't risk contradiction. Your brother follows, counting softly, his own heartbeat, yours maybe the world's. Your mother trails behind with her shawl pulled tight, the threads of her face unraveling. Your father doesn't come at all. He has learned that tools are cowards when wood has already chosen its shape. You stop at the base of the beams. The lantern's flame leans right, The crowd stiffens. Heads turn toward a house near the edge of the square. A blacksmith's cottage, door scarred, roof sagging under too many winters. The blacksmith himself emerges, face red from the forge, hammer in hand as though steel could intimidate fate. "No," he says. His voice is firm, practiced on anvils. "Not me." The flame doesn't straighten. The rope sways once, loop trembling with anticipation. You don't speak. The mask doesn't allow negotiation. You lift the lantern higher. The crowd gasps as one, like a lung deciding to collapse. The blacksmith drops the hammer. His knees follow. "Please," he whispers, no louder than coal dust. Your brother tugs your sleeve. "Don't," he breathes, small but sharp. He builds things. He makes. "Don't." And for the first time in many nights, you hesitate. The tunnels of the mask don't like hesitation. They narrow harder, forcing your vision into obedience. The flame leans further, insistent as if the decision has already been written and you're just the courier. The rope above hums approval. You tilt the lantern back, center. The flame steadies. The rope slackens. The blacksmith sobs into his calloused hands, hammer forgotten. Relief breaks the crowd like glass, sharp and loud, cutting some, sparing others. But relief doesn't last. It never does. The beams groan again, louder this time. The wood stretches upward, cracking against the sky. The rope swings, impatient, unsatisfied. The villagers scream, not because of you, but because of the sound. The realization that the gate is hungry, and hunger never forgives delay. Your mother grabs your arm. "You cannot keep saying no," she hisses, desperate, eyes frantic. "If you don't feed it, it will take everything." "Then let it," you whisper through wood. She recoils as if slapped. Even your brother stares, lost between awe and terror. The villagers murmur. Some agree, some curse. All fear. That night the knock comes again, but not from walls, not from doors, not from inside your chest. It comes from the sky. 3 thunderous thuds, echoing across the rooftops, rolling down chimneys, rattling shutters. Thud, thud, thud. The sound makes snow leap off roofs like frightened birds. The villagers wake screaming. Fires are lit. Candles burn until wax drowns them. Children cling to mothers, mothers to prayers, fathers to useless tools. You don't scream. You sit upright, mask already in your hands, lantern already burning. You know what it means. The gate is done waiting for you to choose. Now it is knocking for itself. And you, lying in your bed, listening to this, don't pretend you didn't hear it too. That rolling, heavy sound above your ceiling, inside your walls, inside your bones. 3 knocks, deep and final. Thud, thud, thud. You tell yourself it was thunder, or trucks, or neighbors. You tell yourself anything that isn't the truth. But the truth is simple. The knock travels. It never belonged only to them. By morning the beams are taller than the chapel spire. The rope dangles like a finger pointing down. The villagers gather, pale and wordless, staring at the shadow that now covers the entire square. The priest clutches his book so hard the pages tear. The Lord's men whisper about abandoning the village. The baker's wife hasn't left her house in days. You stand at the base of the gate, lantern raised, mask sealed. The crowd watches, waiting, always waiting. And this time you don't speak. You knock. Thud. The beams answer. Thud. The rope swings like applause. Thud. The sky groans, and the gate opens. When a door opens, you expect hinges, screws, a courteous swing. The gate doesn't do courtesy. It opens the way winter opens, by removing anything that wasn't committed to staying. The beams don't part so much as decide to be further apart than before. The rope doesn't lift. It rises like breath turning into speech. Air rushes in as if the square were a chest finally allowed to inhale, and every candle shudders with the same ah, then quiet, the expensive kind. You stand at the mouth of it, not a passage, not exactly. A thickness, the space between snowflakes, the place inside silence, where footsteps try their first words. Behind you, villagers crowd the edges of courage. Your brother grips your sleeve, counting under his breath and failing because numbers refuse to behave near edges. The mask tightens, tunneling the world into 2 obedient lanes, forward and not forward. The lantern's flame leans right, hungry to name someone. You tilt it back to center and the flame sulks, thin and vertical as a threat pretending to be a candle. "What's inside?" the priest asks, voice thready. the last courage he has pinned to a question mark. Ask, you say, and hate that it sounds poetic. The gate likes poetry. It means less food, more taste. You step. The square gasps. A single body without coordination. Cold wraps your ankles like a rumor you cannot shake. The dark just beyond the rope is not absence. It's attention. You feel it lift your breath like a judge weighing a coin. Then the smell hits. Not death, not wood, not rope. Cinnamon, orange peel, warm bread. A sweetness built from memories so cheap and honest, you want to drop the lantern and run to the table that isn't there. Laughter, yours, your brother's, winter before it learned strictness. Bells too, not church, not alarm. The little ones sewn to a hat, too festive to survive. Christmas tries to rescue you in exactly the language you can't resist. Don't, your mother says behind you, like she's catching a pan falling off a hook. Smell is a rope. She's right. You brace. The sweetness recedes, replaced by iron and smoke and tar. The hangman's grammar. Your eyes water. The mask drinks the tears and gives you wood instead. The gate shows you a lane. Not the road west, not the forest path. Your home's floorboards, lit soft, scrubbed clean. On them, the rope, coiled. The nail, smiling its bent smile. The ribbon, red as a decision. The crooked horse, leg splinted straight with that iron sleeve you didn't give it. In the image, someone reaches down, 2 finger and thumb, and lifts the loop like you'd lift a cup from a saucer. Your stomach goes winter. The hand is yours. You pull back a fraction on instinct. The gate doesn't punish. It waits. That's worse. Waiting is a luxury monsters can afford. Do you see it? The priest again, but softer. He wants scripture to catch up. I see practice, you answer. The world rehearsing us. The crowd ripples with unhappiness because rehearsal means someone bought tickets. Your brother squeezes your sleeve once, a small anchor. Is there another way? He whispers, voice so thin the air might tear it. Always, you say, because the lantern can't prevent lying when the lie is medicine. A figure steps up beside you. Not your father, not your mother. The baker's wife, ribbons faded into bruises, loaf held like a shield. She stares into the gate, face going younger and older in the same breath. Oven, she says, as if answering a question no one asked. He's asking for the oven lit, and she starts to cry delicately, like steam does, the kind that fogs glass but never drips. She doesn't step through, she doesn't run. She stands in the door of her own fear and remembers the recipe. Others speak. The miller, scales, the beadle, a bell with wool, the blacksmith, quiet and wrecked, a nail. The words shuffle together into a Christmas carol sung from the backside of the holiday, the part with the hooks. The gate is generous. It shows everyone the one thing they've trained the world to use them for. You realize with a pain that feels like growing that the hangman was never Santa in costume. He was the facilitator, the one who held the sack while your village wrapped its own gifts in dread. He didn't choose the rope. He distributed it. Delegation dressed as doom. And you are now the courier, the ink, the knock. Close it, someone begs. Maybe you, maybe all of them. The word arrives in the square and can't find a place to sit. You lift the lantern, flame to center. The gate's breath warms half a degree, interested. If I step in, you ask the thickness, do I end the count? Your voice hits the edge and comes back aged. The gate does not answer in words. It exhales cinnamon again, then iron, then cold water. 3 true things you can't hold at once. Don't, your brother says into your elbow, and that decides it because love is the only spell that bullies ritual. You pivot away from the opening and raise the lantern toward the crowd, sweeping it like a slow, deliberate tide. Eyes fall, knees bend. People mistake not being chosen for being blessed. The hangman arrives late, or maybe he arrives on time and you've been early all winter. He stands at the fringe, hood lower than a thought, hands free, no lantern. Absence still heavy enough to bruise. He does nothing but exist, and somehow the gate's breath alters to match his lungs. You meet his shadow with yours. The rope swings between you like punctuation. Trade, you say, surprising yourself. You taught me counting. I'll teach you mercy. He tilts his hood. The square forgets to blink. He lifts his empty hand and opens it, palm like a quiet table. You set the mask there. You don't let go. He doesn't take it. You stand like that, 2 hands and 1 wooden face held between, until the gate stops smelling like childhood and starts smelling like now. In the palm mirror of that moment, you see an answer you hate. This was never about who wears the wood. It was about who refuses to let it decide. You keep the mask, you turn to the gate. Not today, you tell it. And your voice is not wood, not iron, not cinnamon. It is you, the thin, stubborn thread that tied itself to the first knock and refused to snap. The gate's edges flex, annoyance masquerading as wind. The rope quivers with insult. Someone sobs in relief so violently they wake a baby that wasn't asleep. The priest drops to his knees because any posture that isn't standing will do. Your brother counts 3 and declares the number holy, but refusal writes its own bill. The gate doesn't slam. It narrows. Slowly, cruelly, like a mouth realizing you're not edible yet and deciding it will grow a new tooth just for you. It will be back. That is the promise you make when you don't feed a hunger. You schedule a larger meal. You lower the lantern. The flame chooses center, exhausted as a soldier after parade. You step backward, one careful pace at a time, until rope and beams are out of your tunnels, and the square returns to its lesser physics. Go home, you say, and they don't argue because your voice is the only authority that hasn't fled. Back at the hearth, the chalk symbol glows like an old bruise. The ribbon remains pinned beneath the nail. The rope, insulted, sulks on the threshold with the dignity of a cat. You sit. You set the lantern between your knees and cup its glass with both hands. The flame bows once, twice, like a servant that enjoyed the play. Your brother leans against your shoulder and counts the quiet. Your mother mends nothing with furious expertise. Your father turns a scrap of wood into something shaped like prayer. Outside, the boundary stone clicks once, gently like a door deciding it will try again tomorrow. And you, wide awake, listening, you already feel what the village will feel, what every winter feels. The knock you refuse today, learning a better route. The gate learning your name. The story taking a breath before it decides if it's done with you. A soft sound from the square interrupts the room's attempt at pretending. Metal against wood. Polite. Patient. You lift your head. Your brother stops counting. Your mother's needle hangs, thread reaching for a horizon. Thud. Not thunder, not roof, not dream. The gate has remembered its manners. Someone is knocking on it from the other side. The square doesn't breathe anymore. It holds its lungs like a miser hoarding coins. The gate looms taller than stories, thicker than prayer. The villagers gather because they cannot not gather. Fear is magnetic. And tonight, the rope doesn't just sway, it listens. The knock comes again. Thud. From the wrong side. From inside the beams. From a space no one should occupy, but clearly someone does. The wood shivers. Snow jumps off rooftops. Candles bow until their flames lick stone. The villagers drop to their knees. Some pray, some sob, some hide their faces in shawls. The priest screams scripture in Latin, but his voice breaks like a tooth. Your mother clutches your brother so hard he squeaks like a caught bird. Your father doesn't move. He's staring at the gate with the quiet acceptance of a carpenter, admiring a coffin he didn't mean to build but did anyway. The lantern in your hand leans left, then right, then forward, as if desperate to declare a direction, but unable to choose. The mask presses tight, hot, wood against skin like a brand. You step forward, because the square has already decided you will. The rope stretches down, lower, lower. Its loop yawns wide, a hungry mouth waiting to feed. The villagers gasp as one body. They think it's for you, it isn't, because when the third knock lands, thud, the rope swings not toward you, but toward the crowd, toward them. The villagers scream. Mothers clutch children. Men raise tools that turn to splinters in their hands. The rope lashes once, twice like a whip learning geography. No necks caught, yet. But the message is clear. The gate isn't waiting for volunteers anymore. It's hungry enough to hunt. You lift the lantern high. The flame stretches tall, too tall, a sword of light. The rope freezes mid-swing. The beams groan like sulking giants. Silence lands heavy again. And then, from inside the gate, laughter. Not cruel, not kind, not human. A sound like rope fraying and re-knotting at the same time. It echoes out, filling every corner of the square, seeping into ears, into walls, into bones. The villagers collapse under it, clutching their heads. Even the priest drops his cross. Only you stand, Lantern raised, mask sealed, facing the black inside the wood. "Who knocks?" you demand, your voice hollow, amplified, made of wood and will. The laughter stops. A pause so long you think maybe silence has killed it. Then a voice answers. Not one, many, layered, old, young, men, women, children, the sound of everyone who has ever waited for mercy and didn't get it. "We do." The crowd wails. Some faint, some flee, some claw at the snow as if digging will help. Your brother clings to your mother, both eyes wide, both mouths shut. Your father finally drops to his knees, but not to pray. He's measuring, with the quiet horror of a craftsman, the dimensions of beams he knows he could never cut down. The rope stretches again, lower, wider, but not toward the villagers this time. Toward you. You don't step back. You can't. The mask won't allow it. You raise the lantern higher until the flame bends backward against its own glass. The rope freezes again, inches from your face. "Not today," you whisper. The gate rumbles, the beams creak, the rope hisses through fibers, and the voices answer again. "Tomorrow." The lantern's flame gutters, almost dies, then flares, taller than ever, splitting shadows across the square like cracks in glass. You feel the heat scorch your hand, but you don't let go. The rope recoils, loop tightening in frustration. The beams groan higher, until they sound less like wood and more like something alive trying to stretch out of its skeleton. And then, silence. The rope stills, the beams straighten. The gate closes, not slamming, but narrowing, lips pressing shut, on a word it isn't done with. The night exhales, steam rising off the villagers as if relief itself were heat. The priest crawls forward, clutching the hem of your cloak. "End it," he begs. "Please, child, end it before it speaks again." You look down at him. Through the tunnels of the mask, he's just another face shaped like waiting. "It never ends," you say. You walk home. The villagers don't follow. They scatter, each one carrying silence like contraband. Your mother weeps quietly into your brother's hair. Your father carries nothing, not even his shadow. At the hearth, the rope lies coiled on the threshold, patient, faithful. The chalk glows faintly under the nail and ribbon, tired but alive. You set the lantern down. The flame steadies, no longer leaning, no longer bowing, simply burning as though waiting to see which way you will lean. Your brother climbs into your lap. He whispers a number into your chest. You realize he isn't counting steps anymore. He's counting days. Days until the next knock, days until the gate opens again, and you, yes, you, wide awake, listening, you realize you're doing the same, counting, because you already know the truth. The knock doesn't belong to them. It doesn't belong to her. It belongs to everyone willing to hear it. And tonight you've heard it too. Thud, thud, thud. Not from outside, not from inside. From the story itself. Tomorrow waits.